Falling to the ground, she comments that he wasn't interested in her before, and the boy says he changed his mind. Completely horrified, she tells him not to come any closer. With a terrifying look, the protagonist starts to laugh, saying she should do as he commands. The Demon King's expression is so frightening that her eyes widen in alarm. Faced with the situation, she starts screaming. Tearing up, she says it's her first time and asks him to be gentle.
In the Demon Castle, in the main hall of the Demon King's first palace, Mary is seated on her throne. Suddenly, someone begins to approach him. It's a girl with pink hair who calls him Mission and seems to be his sister. She remarks that the boy has a very handsome face, and afterward, she feels a bit embarrassed. She approaches and observes the protagonist with a somewhat suspicious expression. She gets so close it seems like she's about to kiss him. She thinks it's rare to see him sleeping like this and that she should take advantage of this opportunity. Then someone starts shouting. Outside the castle, soldiers begin to yell, "Long live the goddess of light, invincible army of the church." Deeply irritated, the woman wonders how the church dares to choose this moment to attack. She decides to pretend she didn't see anything to take advantage of the situation, but the boy is awake and places his finger on her mouth. He asks Lilith what she's doing, and embarrassed, she tries to explain. Then she tries to bite his finger, but he quickly dodges. The boy comments that the annoying church group has already arrived. Nervous, Lilith comments that just a bit longer, and she would have stolen his lips. He only smiles in response. In a swift motion, he grabs her by the waist, pulling her onto his lap. With a confident look, he asserts that there is no one in this world who can surprise him. While she hugs him with great happiness, the people outside are still yelling. Grabbing a sword from the portal, she declares she will destroy all these annoying pests. But the protagonist tells her to calm down and not get upset over these insects. He states that he'll personally deal with them, as they came looking for trouble on the last day of his reign. As they walk to confront the army, he orders Lilith to stay close to him. Meanwhile, a battle occurs between humans and demons. Excited, the boy comments that things are heating up. A little disappointed, Lilith wishes things would heat up between her and him. At that moment, the protagonist notices a girl with silver hair fighting a goblin and deduces that she is this generation's heroine. She is attacking the goblin with determination. While watching her, he comments that she seems very weak. However, she manages to slice the goblin in half. The audience then says that the heroine is very strong and that defeating a monster with a single blow is incredible. The two celebrate the chance to fight alongside this heroine. Suddenly, a giant monster resembling a desert snake appears. Looking back, both are frightened and start screaming. Quickly, the heroine uses the ice slab attack. Charging towards the giant monster without hesitation, she manages to deliver a fatal blow. Frightened, the two cowardly warriors just watch fallen to the ground. Smiling, the heroine asserts that one should never let their guard down during a battle. Moved, they wonder how Alice can be so perfect. Raising her sword impressively, the heroine begins to declare something. She says she will defeat the Demon King Lucifer, and everyone around begins to cheer. An army is near the Demon King's castle. Annoyed, the man comments that the useless ones in the vanguard are hindering the heroine. One of his subordinates asks him to calm down and says that the peasants are useless while the church's elite squad is still fighting. Fearing they might be sacrificed, he states that the church's army only needs to secure victory once everyone is dead. At that moment, the subordinate expresses concern over whether the heroine can actually defeat the Demon King. Laughing, the bearded man tells them not to worry because everything will be fine. Even if the heroine is killed by Lucifer, after all, his secret weapon is still hidden in the skies. Looking back, the heroine notices something strange happening. She sees that the vanguard squad is surrounded by monsters. At that moment, she starts to feel nervous and prepares to act. But as she looks up, she sees something approaching. Excited, the bishop declares that this is the secret weapon the church has been seeking for 100 years, possessing unimaginable power. He explains that with the wisdom of countless men, the greatest, most beautiful, and most fearsome weapon was created across the continent. A sight so imposing that the warriors stop fighting just to observe. Stammering, the heroine wonders what kind of horrible monster she is witnessing. The man then states that this is the Maiden of Battle, and that everyone must experience with their bodies the power of the church's greatest masterpiece. At that moment, the creature begins to open its mouth as if to form an attack. It fires a kind of ray towards the people, and the heroine questions if it has gone mad, saying the vanguard squad will die from such an attack. Being very far away, she thinks she won't be able to reach in time. The Demon King then comments that it is something ugly. Many humans fighting against the monsters end up closing their eyes due to the immense amount of light. The energy blast is so powerful that it causes a huge explosion. The bishop tells Lucifer to behold the power of the church, and in the name of the goddess of light, he condemns them to death. After the dust settles, the heroine is still barely able to stand. Looking forward, she notices the presence of a boy and a demon woman, surprising her. The men and monsters who were fighting are lying on the ground at that very moment. One of them, particularly shocked, gets up, questioning if he is still alive. Bursting with confidence, Merlin explains that he is not dead and states that only he can decide who lives and who dies. Nervous, the heroine begins to understand who this man in front of her is. He is the Demon King Lucifer Aya, who orders the weak to bow. Angry, the bishop claims it is impossible and questions how an attack more powerful than a sacred weapon was blocked. His subordinates comment that there's no way to defeat him. They ask if they should retreat and say Lucifer II is more powerful than they imagined. Deeply irritated, the bishop orders them not to be afraid. He explains that this weapon is the most powerful on the entire continent and that even if he managed to block the laser cannon, he won't withstand a direct attack. Then he commands the Maiden of Battle to crush Lucifer with her body. Mocking, the boy remarks that the bishop is weak, but since he tried so hard to explain all this, he at least acknowledges the effort. At that moment, he waits for the Maiden of Battle to approach and states that it's time to use his sword. Swiftly, he draws his sword and delivers a deadly strike against the Maiden of Battle, slicing her in half. Seeing this scene, Lilith becomes even more infatuated, while Alice watches in disbelief and fear. After defeating this gigantic monster with a single blow, the boy starts to smile and mock the situation. Even the other monsters can't believe what they're seeing. The bishop then starts to become completely unhinged. This giant whale-like creature was sliced in half and shredded in seconds. To complete his performance with a flourish, the boy sheathes his sword. Excited, Lilith calls Merlin handsome. Completely shocked and stammering, Alice can't believe what just happened. The church guards are also in disbelief. Exuding confidence, Merlin says that now he sees the losers and calls them the cowards of the church, saying he has nothing to do with it. He declares that as the current demon king, he will grant them all a glorious death. Terrified, the bishop calls for the heroine, telling her she needs to save herself and that if she does nothing, everyone will die. Nervously, the heroine realizes that they are right and that as the heroine, it is her duty to defeat the demon king. At that moment, she grips her sword and tightens her hold. Charging forward, she challenges the demon king to a duel. The girl approaches to try and attack from behind the demon king. At that moment, Lucifer opens his eyes and emits a great amount of energy, causing her to retreat. Bending his knees, he begins to draw his sword. He pulls the sword from its sheath and delivers a massive strike in another direction. Surprised, Alice realizes he is ignoring her. The impact of the attack is so strong that it throws the heroine backward while defeating all other monsters in front of him. With this single sword strike, he creates a massive explosion. We see only the bishop's hat flying through the air, indicating he is likely dead. After this immense display of power, the hero glances to the side and notices Alice lying on the ground. And so this is how the last battle of the Demon King Merlin ends, beginning his story as an unemployed hero. This is Merlin Lucifer, summoned from another world by the altar. Having been born with an immense amount of power, he quickly became the third Demon King by taking over the first palace, earning the title of Monarch of Pride. However, something else happened. In truth, Merlin was born with a curse, a letter, a hypertrophic apathy that, besides extending his lifespan, also makes him suffer heart pain every moment of his life. However, for every problem, there is a solution, and for Merlin, it is Eternum, a demonic sword he possesses. Whenever he uses the sword to kill powerful enemies, the sword extends his lifespan, and thanks to this, he can temporarily alleviate the effects of the curse. Therefore, the stronger the enemy, the greater the effects of the sword, leading Merlin to believe he will one day find the world's strongest person. Returning to the present, he defeats that giant whale-like creature. Thus, on his last day as Demon King, he believes he will manage to break the curse once he defeats the planet's strongest person. After defeating the monster, he says it's finally over and that his services are no longer needed in the demon castle. He states it's time to embark on an adventure. After this grand battle, it's time for farewells and his sister calls him. Smiling, the boy asks Lilith why she is sad. Placing his hand on her face, he tells her it's his last day as king, and once he leaves, she'll have to take care of herself. Hearing this, the girl starts to worry. Trembling, she seems to be struggling to say something. While crying, she says he must not go and leave her behind, and that he has always been by her side since she was born. Caressing her head, the protagonist tells Lilith that she surely loves being spoiled, but now she's a grown-up. At that moment, he places his hand over his chest, warning her that if he stays here, sooner or later, his heart's curse will end up killing him. He asks if she wants her brother to die. Hugging him, she says she doesn't want him to die, but she also doesn't want to be left alone. Then she begins to suggest something. She says that if the curse attacks him again, he could use her life to extend his own lifespan. Hearing this, the boy's eyes widen. With a strong flick to her forehead, he calls her an idiot. He says he would never do that to her. Desperate, she says she doesn't care and that she doesn't want him to die. She explains that she wouldn't mind taking care of him even if he became a useless NEET. Nervously, he starts thinking about this term, useless NEET. Smiling, he tells Lilith that he loves her and that he must go now, for otherwise, he'll never break the curse. Then he swears that the moment he succeeds, he will return to stay by her side and never leave her again. He tells her to trust him, that when that day comes, not even death will separate them. With this declaration of love, the girl tells her brother that she loves him too. She says that after hearing this, she can no longer continue acting like a spoiled girl. Before leaving, she wants to give him some advice. At this, the boy becomes extremely confused. His sister then says there are many clever women in this world and Merlin should be careful not to fall for their charms. With a mischievous smile, he replies that it doesn't matter who they are, he'll kill them all, pulling out each strand of their hair and skinning them alive. Hearing this, he wonders if his sister is actually a yandere. A bit nervous, he bids her farewell, saying it's getting late and he's leaving. He continues walking until he reaches Alice. He observes her and realizes she seems to be sleeping. Merlin is surprised, as after being knocked out, this woman ended up falling asleep. Undecided, he picks her up and says he doesn't mind. In the background, his sister watches the scene in astonishment. With a menacing aura, she asks why he is taking this woman. Explaining, he states that there is a misunderstanding and that, to him, this woman will only be a slave. He says that he knows little about the world and will need a guide on this journey. Then he states that, although this woman is far too weak to be a heroine, her willpower and resilience are good, and she could be a useful tool by his side. Annoyed, Alice says that she is a heroine and that Merlin should have finished her off. The boy then explains that it's fine and that after sunset, he will no longer be a demon king. He states that this is all and they will meet again. This leaves Alice with a heavy heart. With a sigh as he leaves, he tells her not to worry as he'll never fall for the heroine. At that moment, Merlin is leaving with the heroine in his arms. Tearing up, his sister places her hand over her chest and just watches. Alice then starts to shake her head. She tells herself that now isn't the time to be depressed, and that the next time they meet will be the day they fulfill their promise. Thinking of this possibility, the girl starts to blush. Embarrassed, she wonders if this is a confession and why he said that before leaving, now making her eager to meet him again. Excited, she clenches her fists. She declares that she won't disappoint Merlin and that before he returns, she will complete her official training and capture his heart as a pure bride. Meanwhile, the protagonist is carrying that girl on his back. What fate awaits these two? The unemployed demon king and the captive heroine? The boy keeps carrying Alice on his back. Still unconscious, she wonders if she is lost. Since leaving the mountains, it's been one thing after another. She had a positive outlook on defeating the demon king. However, she recalls what he did to that giant monster and understands that they are not on the same level. Only her master had warned Alice that she was slacking in her cultivation, and the girl remembers he was right, affirming to herself that she truly has been neglecting her cultivation. Meanwhile, the boy spots something in front of him. Seeing the broken boat, he wonders if these ships are destroyed. As a knight, he places Alice to sit by a tree. The blonde realizes he'll have to think of a way to get another boat, and determined in his adventure, he starts looking around. Meanwhile, Alice is still sleeping while sitting. Some kind of monster approaches. A bit of its saliva splashes onto Alice's face. Annoyed, she starts to wake up. However, she realizes there is a giant monster in front of her. Quickly, she stands up and prepares for combat. Yet, upon careful analysis, she realizes it's a demon wolf. The creature is approaching angrily. Scared, she notices it's very close and that this might be the end. But quickly, someone arrives and strikes the monster. It's the protagonist who is holding its snout. Confident, he orders the wolf to lie down immediately. Following the command, the animal lies down without resistance. The boy then tells the wolf that this human is his and that it cannot eat her. Hearing these words, Alice begins to feel a bit nervous. The wolf then appears to be a bit docile, showing no negative reaction. The heroine feels slightly embarrassed as she was saved by this guy once again. Her heartbeat begins to race. Surprisingly, Merlin is petting the wolf affectionately, saying it's a good boy. Watching, Alice thinks he has a radiant smile that doesn't resemble a villain at all. However, she reminds herself he's a demon king, and even if he saved her life, he must have another motive. Afterward, the wolf starts to leave, and the boy bids it farewell. Changing his expression, he calls to the heroine, asking if her name is Alice. Cautious, already holding her sword, she asks what he wants. With a very suspicious expression, the protagonist asks Alice what she thinks the boy would want with her. The girl assumes that he fell for her cute gaze and wants to corrupt her. Freezing her sword's blade, she decides she won't let him do that. She charges at the demon king as he begins to speak. Determined, her ice blade approaches the boy's chest. However, the energy of the attack begins to dissipate from the impact. With just 2 fingers, he managed to hold the blade with extreme ease. Seeing this, Alice is extremely shocked. Merlin then places his hand near the girl's face, saying she's adorable. He tells her that from this moment on, she belongs to him. Judging by Alice's expression, it seems she's somewhat enjoying this and wanting to lean into him. But she quickly slaps Merlin's hand away. She states that he cannot humiliate her, and as the heroine Alice, she will not bow her head to a magnificent being like him. Hearing this, he reacts, but he quickly starts to laugh, telling Alice that apparently she misunderstood something as he never asked for a negotiation. With a questionable expression, he states it's time to face reality and that he is her captor. He then approaches her, cornering her against the trunk of a tree. Calling her cute, he warns that she is his prisoner and she must understand that well. He claims that in reality, he is a very kind person. Hearing this, she becomes extremely embarrassed. Stammering, she asks if he wants her to submit to him and questions what he wants her to do. Smiling, he says he'll give her a preview. With a devilish smile, he warns that right now he's going to take her body and do many irrational and inhuman things. Hearing this, the girl is in complete shock. She explains that she's heard that some demons are capable of impregnating human women and using their bodies to create their demonic offspring. Alice then comments that she hasn't even had a proper encounter yet and wonders if she's now going to become the breeding sow for the demon king. Merlin takes her hand, saying that now she must come with him. Slapping his hand away, the heroine tells him not to touch her and calls him a demon king obsessed with carnal relations. Annoyed, the blonde says she is very disobedient. Picking her up in his arms, he says she shouldn't blame him for being a bit rough. Completely irritated, Alice tells him to let her go and calls him a pervert. Thus, he sets her down in the boat. At that moment, Alice finds herself completely embarrassed. With a showman's grin, the boy announces that now they will begin. Irritated, the heroine tells him to stay away, calling him a pervert and a kidnapper, as well as a bastard demon king. Every time he steps closer, she warns she'll jump into the sea. Both of them are now on the boat. Alice stands preparing to fight. Seeing the protagonist's mocking smile, she becomes irritated. She declares she won't let him do whatever he wants just because he's strong, and if he comes any closer, she'll kill him. 2 wooden oars lie near the girl. The protagonist notices them. He steps on one of the oars and with that manages to knock it against the heroine's head. This makes her drop her sword, leaving her completely unarmed. Just that unexpected blow has hurt her head considerably. Thoughtfully, he wonders how an idiotic girl like her could become a heroine. Tearing up, she comments that he can just do it now if he's so excited, and that he doesn't need to be so violent. Alice then sighs and tells him not to be so foolish, as she's seen all types of women, and there's no way his act would make her feel that way. Embarrassed, she remarks that this is normal for a girl her age. Then he comments that if she plans on enhancing her chest, she should at least choose something soft. Laughing, she declares that this is her Demetriu armor. Laughing uncontrollably, he realizes it's armor with padding, and he bets the ancient heroes would roll in their graves if they heard this. Annoyed, Alice questions why he kidnapped her, as this wasn't his intention. Raising a finger, he begins to explain, asking if she saw those oars. Dispassionately, he explains that they're going to sail across the Orkney Strait. In shock, she questions if they're crossing the seas to enter Britain's territory. She states that he must be stupid and asserts that it's impossible. She says that when the church's server sails near Bristol, they'll need 70 men rowing with the help of a magical element, and it will take an entire day. She also mentions that there are countless sea creatures hiding in the strait, and that in the ocean, they're practically invincible beings. Moreover, she states it's impossible to row in shifts, and if they encounter these sea creatures, they'll end up as shark bait. In response, the boy simply laughs. Merlin addresses the young heroine, saying she seems to have misunderstood something, and asks when he said they would row in shifts. He explains that he already told her he'll take her body and do rational and inhuman things, and she's the only one who will be rowing on this boat. As for him, he'll be standing there enjoying the beautiful view of the sea. Hearing this explanation, the heroine is completely confused. Then she starts questioning what he just said. 3 days end up passing. The girl is still rowing while the protagonist stands at the bow of the boat, completely soaked. She remarks that it's strange. It's been 3 days since they started sailing, and she wonders why no sea creatures have attacked them. She explains that the ocean is full of countless dangers, and approaching someone stronger carelessly could result in a premature death. With his arms crossed, he explains that there's a very large one following them, and because of this, the smaller fish have chosen to keep their distance. Sometimes it's to ensure they won't swim, so she'll be on her own if she falls out of the boat. Alice then comments that she heard he once split a sea demon in 2 with his bare hands. Smiling, he explains that that sea demon was a Swedish delicacy that had come to shore and wanted so badly to die that he simply granted its wish. As he continues explaining, something approaches the bow of the boat. A massive wave forms, leaving the woman in shock, while the protagonist explains that the culprit this time is much larger than that sea demon. This sea monster is exceptionally large. Seeing this, Merlin prepares to save her. Quickly, he strikes the tip of the boat, causing it to flip and fall perfectly into the water. The heroine lands on her rear in the boat, and the protagonist just places her back to safety. Both observe the giant monster before them, exuding immense power. In shock, she realizes it's an enormous plesiosaur, the same one that sank the British frontier and killed all the holy class mages, a truly invincible creature. Frightened, she calls to Lucifer, asking what they will do now. At that, the girl falls silent and continues watching. This monster seems to be some kind of giant electric eel. The heroine has no answer, left completely speechless. With her hands on her head, she mutters that they're doomed, and even Lucifer seems a bit alarmed. Breaking the silence, the boy begins to talk about the plesiosaur. Pointing at the monster, he comments that it's still really ugly, which surprises the monster itself. Laughing, he says that for such a wide neck, its head is very small and definitely empty inside. Alice wonders why he still has the humor to say nonsense at a time like this. After hearing these insults, the monster becomes completely enraged, his aura shifting. With his tail, it prepares to strike the 2. It then smashes into the ocean with immense force. The impact is so powerful that it starts creating multiple waves around the boat. Worried, the heroine asks how they'll fight something that rivals the power of nature. Profoundly angry, the monster continues to roar, exuding its power. The boat, still struggling, remains upright. Holding his sword, Merlin prepares to attack. He says that since the monster sees him as prey, he can't be blamed for it. The 2 of them face the giant monster, and while Merlin is totally confident, the girl is utterly terrified. With that, this giant eel-like creature charges at them. The hero begins to unsheath his sword. Then he makes a simple slash in the air. This small attack starts to lift the waves. Seeing this, the heroine is utterly shocked. The monster itself seems to realize something is coming. The attack begins to reverberate through the waves. The boy then swings his sword. Striking a heroic pose, he sheathes it back. Approaching the girl, he says it was very easy. She just watches in complete disbelief. To snap her out of her trance, the boy starts pinching her cheek. He tells her to stop staring into space and start rowing because it's time for them to go. Pointing upwards, she alerts him that the monster has not yet perished. This giant monster continues to roar and rage. Suddenly, several cuts begin to appear all over its body. In just a few seconds, it's completely sliced apart while the protagonist asks if there's anything else she'd like to say. He adds that perhaps the blood will attract sharks with their keen sense of smell, and if she wants to linger, she'll indeed become shark bait. Following the protagonist's orders, she starts rowing. Observing him, she realizes that this guy isn't just strong on land, he's incredibly powerful, even on the ocean. She tells herself that if he reaches human lands, there will be severe consequences. Stammering, she calls him Lucifer, asking why he left the demon palace. He then explains that she shouldn't call him that way since he's no longer the demon king. He then asks her to call him by his name. Smiling, he says he should be called Captain Merlin. Hearing this, she has no reaction whatsoever. Seeing her lack of enthusiasm, the boy also becomes a bit disheartened. Laughing, he asks if she has a sense of humor, explaining that he was invincible within the demon tribe, so he got bored and left the demon palace just to cause trouble elsewhere. He thinks it's better not to let her know that in reality he was fired by the demon council. She asks if he's of holy class. He replies that he has no idea as his strength can't be measured by others' standards. At this, Alice comments that he must have pushed his limits to attain this level of strength and wonders if the saying is true. Genius is just 1% talent and 99% hard work. After hearing this, the boy just sighs. Laughing, he questions if she truly believes that. He explains that the person who invented that was trying to make average and ungifted people, like her, spend their lives working hard for nothing. He continues saying that talent is enough and one should just keep their feet on the ground instead of wasting hard work on meaningless things. At this point, the heroine then asks when she might be able to surpass him. The protagonist draws his sword, saying that within the demon tribe, he's the only one who can wield this magic sword, which is why he inherited the first palace. He explains that this is a kind of natural gift, a skill that can't be surpassed by mere hard work. After his explanation, she falls silent. Then she asks how he became so strong and if he can tell her. He just stares with a blank expression but then starts to tell her. He explains that he was born in the fortress and thought he wouldn't need to do anything for the rest of his life. However, his mother was the second monarch of Pride, also known as Lucifer too. During the church's 197th campaign, his mother was killed in battle. Thus, he and his sister had only each other to rely on to survive. But he was weak, and living in demon lands meant he would have to live by the law of the jungle. From then on, he swore he would become stronger than anyone else to protect his sister from everything. He killed the ancient giant demon in the snowy mountains and also battled the bullhead sorcerer in the forest. Merlin even fought to the death with the infernal demon in the lava. He reveals that he trained his sword skills beyond the limits, swinging it every day until the blade began to rust, bringing him to the brink of death many times. But in the end, he managed to kill the demon oppressing him and his sister with his own hands and then became the new demon king. It was then he realized he had become invincible. Returning to the present, he says that's why, and that this is his past, the chronicles of a prince seeking revenge. Interested, she remarks that he indeed worked hard to gain such strength. Dismissing that notion, he comments that he only dreams of living as someone who does nothing, questioning why he would work hard, claiming he was born strong. Irritated, she asks why he told such a tragic story then, questioning if he was just messing with her. Smiling, he says he didn't lie, he did have a tragic past. But after all that, he had so much power he didn't know how to use it, essentially becoming useless. However, he ended up relying on his power and became the most powerful person in the world. Alice still doesn't understand any of what's happening. Merlin mentions that it's quite filthy and that, anyway, she will understand what he's saying and now should get back to rowing, calling her a flat-chested, useless heroine. Looking at the boat, he comments that it was indeed the best choice to leave the palace since the curse on his heart has eased, and in this way he can continue like this for a while. However, he wonders if this is an illusion or if, in reality, his heart feels calmer when he's near this stupid heroine. The next day on a coast, their boat finally reaches solid ground. Surveying the area, Merlin wonders if this is the island of Britain. He asks Alice what this place is as he had said they were heading to Britain, and also notes he doesn't see a single village here. From within the boat, the heroine starts to get up. Completely seasick, she steps out of the boat and he asks if she's an idiot. At that moment, the heroine stumbles out of the boat. Annoyed, he calls her a fool, saying she really made him row the whole journey. She thinks he's an ungrateful, repugnant fool and that when the time is right, she'll master her teacher's secret ice arts and become an expert. At that moment, the boy approaches her. He calls her Miss Alice and suggests that perhaps she should reconsider her attitude and position. He states that she is indeed a slave and questions who she thinks she is to be acting out. His hand then moves closer. Wary, she wonders if he's about to do something strange, but he simply begins pinching her cheeks. Confused, the heroine questions what he's doing. Ignoring her, he just continues pinching her cheeks. Deeply irritated and embarrassed, she tells him to stop and explains that this really is Britain, not a port, but a place near the northern coast. Seeing her response, the boy is impressed. Adjusting his coat, he comments that she really worked hard rowing the boat and that he'll have to commend her for it. On her knees, she says she doesn't want his praise. Laughing, Merlin says he'll see her around and that it was truly an incredible experience sailing with her. Watching him walk away, she's deeply irritated and thinks that one day she'll cut off the head of that foolish demon king. She continues on her way, focused on her goal. However, he stops to think. Realizing he has no coins with him, he figures he'll likely need money to survive in a human country. At that moment, he turns his head back. Seeing the demon king's interested gaze, the girl becomes frightened. Sometime later, he's carrying the heroine and considers that her metal plate is probably the mithril armor passed down through generations of heroines. He imagines that it must be imbued with runes for all kinds of magical essences, and the fact that she's bearing it shows its worth. Excited, he realizes that if he can get his hands on her mithril armor, he'll be able to sell it for a lot of money. Suddenly, he starts laughing like a villain. He quickly runs toward the girl, who is startled. Holding her hand, he calls her a lovely young lady, saying that parting like this truly breaks his heart. So he kindly asks her to offer her most precious possession. Stammering, utterly confused, she asks what he wants. To her surprise, he tells her to take off her armor, leaving her in complete shock.
Falling to the ground, she comments that he wasn't interested in her before, and the boy says he changed his mind. Completely horrified, she tells him not to come any closer. With a terrifying look, the protagonist starts to laugh, saying she should do as he commands. The Demon King's expression is so frightening that her eyes widen in alarm. Faced with the situation, she starts screaming. Tearing up, she says it's her first time and asks him to be gentle. Confused, he asks what she's thinking and says that what he wants is the armor she's holding. Embarrassed, Alice doesn't understand anything that's happening. Excited, Merlin explains that he wants her Serena mithril armor and that this item is definitely worth a lot. As he walks away, he says this is their farewell and that if it's fate, they'll meet again, then begins to laugh. Seeing this, the girl is completely stunned. Trembling with rage, she calls him despicable and feels humiliated. Suddenly, she begins to cry. She shouts to the heavens that she never wants to see him again. On her knees, the heroine is overcome with tears. Meanwhile, Lilith is making some kind of potion in a cauldron while reading a recipe book. She's humming as she looks out over the forest, saying that she hopes to meet interesting people from now on. A year passes, now in the outskirts of Wales and Britain. A man is walking while holding his weapon. One of them remarks that the people of this country must be getting smarter and asks the senior member if they're really going to be able to rob someone by waiting in this spot. But the red-haired one tells him to be patient. Looking to the side, the man notices someone approaching. Observing the stranger, he comments that he's really dressed in rags and looks like he hasn't eaten in days. Looking at the paper in his hand, the redhead starts to realize who this guy is. Suddenly, he starts laughing, confusing his companion. Throwing the paper away, he says appearances can be deceiving and that some people may look weak, but are actually worth a lot of money. Walking while holding a cane, the protagonist is exhausted and says he's starving. Looking up, he sees a piece of paper. With a strong gust of wind, the paper ends up slapping him in the face. It's his wanted poster labeled Scottish Gigolo, the bounty of 5,000. Looking at his poster, he mutters that it's a pain to be labeled a criminal character just for a few dinners and pranks. Placing his hand on his face, he realizes he can't do much since he spent all his money, and he estimates there's no place around here with easy, well-paying work. At that moment, someone approaches, calling him a brat and telling him to stay put. The two men declare that this road belongs to them and that this isn't a surprise. Not understanding what's happening, the girl just stays silent. They announce that his life and money now belong to them, but Merlin ignores them entirely. Annoyed, the blonde calls to the brat, asking if he didn't hear what they just said. Looking back, unconcerned, the blonde asks if they were talking to him. The old man then declares that they're bandits and the boy must hand over all his belongings. Drawing his dagger, he claims the most valuable thing he has is his life, even that he's a wanted man with a 5,000 gold coin bounty. Licking the blade, he calls him a brat and advises him not to resist, saying the dagger is coated with lethal poison. Sighing, the protagonist asks if the two idiots really want to rob him. Placing his hand on the hilt of his sword, he warns them. With a maniacal grin, he states that if he draws his sword, the two of them will lose their lives. Cracking his knuckles, the younger bandit remarks that it looks like they'll have to show their true skills. Excited, his partner tosses an apple into the air. Quickly, the man starts making cuts with his dagger. Amazingly, he manages to peel the apple in midair with just the dagger perfectly. The sidekick then boasts that his senpai's skill with the dagger is unmatched and that he can loot 20 times in just a second. Looking up, the blonde just watches this display. Starving, he starts drooling, saying he wants the apple. Deeply irritated, the man asks how he dares ignore the demands of an arrogant human. At that moment, he lunges at the protagonist, who just glances aside, watching the blade approach. Annoyed, he decides to unsheath his sword. Smiling, the thief thinks he struck his target. However, he starts sweating nervously, realizing something's off. At that moment, the apple falls perfectly into the protagonist's hand. He begins eating it while his opponent falls to the ground in the background. Stammering, his companion asks how this is possible. Terrified, he runs away, yelling for him not to kill him. Sighing, Merlin states that opponents like this are incredibly boring. The bandit was completely defeated. Looking down, the boy notices something strange. It's the body of a goblin. Surprised, he realizes a goblin was disguised as a human bandit and wonders if he was hiding from the Empire's army. Walking away, he mutters that it's none of his business anyway and he should focus on finding some food. Meanwhile, in a cave, a goblin emerges holding a spear. He points his weapon at a man, demanding to know his business, and the man tells him not to attack. Introducing himself as Haas the Bandit, he requests an audience with His Majesty. Allowing him entry, the guard warns that if it isn't urgent, there will be consequences for disturbing His Majesty at this time. Sitting on his throne, the king asks Haas why he's there and inquires about the money he owes. On his knees, trembling with fear, the man starts apologizing, saying they couldn't rob anyone. Reacting to this, His Majesty starts shouting, asking why he returned and if he wants to be eaten. Terrified, the man explains that, thankfully, there's something he needs to report. He states that Ryu-senpai was defeated by a human. He explains that the man didn't even fully draw his sword. All he saw was a glint of the blade, and Ryu-senpai was down instantly. Hearing this news, the king begins to smile, saying that it seems the humans want to start a war with the goblins and are even bringing in high-level experts. Meanwhile, the protagonist is wandering through the kingdom. He spent his last coins on the entry fee and realizes he needs a job that will allow him to keep living a carefree life. Over the past year, Merlin had embraced a life of indulgence after stealing Alice's mithril armor. The boy had been living in a private mansion, hiring butlers and maids to serve him. All of his meals were prepared by 5-star restaurant chefs. He also frequented horse races, betting extravagantly despite never winning a single time. When he returned to his current state, he realized he had already spent all the money from selling the mithril armor, even accumulating a huge loan in the process. But, accustomed to a life of luxury, he continued to visit 5-star restaurants even though he was completely broke. A man posts the wanted notice on the board. He remarks that this bastard has really caused chaos throughout Scotland. In the end, the protagonist became a fugitive. No longer able to live in Scotland, he began a life on the run from his debt collectors. Now the former demon king of the first palace had become a street performer. After asking for money, people started questioning if he was a street artist and what was going on. Excited, Merlin announced it was time to show off some of his true skills. At that moment, he performed a sidestep repetition move. Impressed, people exclaimed how amazing it was and wondered if he was a martial artist because of his incredible speed. With his hand over his face, he said that was just the beginning and advised them to pay attention to what was coming next. Then he began tapping his feet multiple times. Demonstrating his magical prowess, he told them to observe his step clones. Seeing this grand performance, everyone was amazed, saying they had never seen a display like that. In response to their praise, the boy just smiled and said that now, having enjoyed the show, everyone could give him money. He pleaded, saying it wasn't easy to make a living and that they should at least give him something. However, he was completely ignored by the crowd. Someone started preaching about the supreme goddess of light, the reincarnation of immortality, eternity, and long life. People began to walk away, unaware that he was about to preach, urging them to hurry along, while the protagonist asked them for just a little copper. Frustrated with the situation, he realized they wouldn't give him anything. Looking to the side, he noticed something. It was a little boy walking alone, sucking on a lollipop. After a light tap on his head, the boy stopped. Looking back, Merlin called out to him, noting the boy's pink waistband of an indeterminate gender. With sparkling eyes, he asked the boy to give him 2 copper coins for food, and in return, he would teach him how to become a master. Terrified, the child called the protagonist Uncle, saying he had no money. At that moment, Merlin put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Annoyed, the boy realized he had just offended the most influential man and the most powerful swordsman in the world. Hearing this, the child was completely shocked. Merlin asked the boy his name, and he replied that he was called Henry. At that point, Merlin merely showed him his sword. Merlin told the boy to listen carefully, as he had offended the master, and though he would be merciful, forgiveness must be bought with money, priced at 2 copper coins. Crying, the child said he hadn't brought any money with him. Crossing his arms, Merlin remarked that the boy looked wealthy and asked how he could have no money. He also added that he would teach him the art of swordsmanship if he just handed over 2 copper coins. This offer piqued the child's interest, and he eagerly asked if Merlin was talking about the art of the invincible sword. Curious, the boy asked what kind of swordsmanship it was, and Merlin responded that it was absolutely devastatingly invincible. Smiling, he said it was called the quick strike. Scoffing, the child remarked that this technique was typical of eager apprentices expecting something impressive, but finding it a total waste. At this comment, the Demon King felt utterly insulted. He explained that his quick strike was different and super powerful, but the child argued that a low-level quick strike would be ineffective in technical zones. Suddenly, the boy reached into his pocket. Handing something to Merlin, he said it was a small reward for his hard work. Opening his hand, the protagonist was completely disheartened to find only 2 candies as his reward. The child then told Merlin that he was still a child and should stop deceiving people and find a real job. Deeply frustrated and clenching his fists, the blonde declared that even if the child begged on his knees, he wouldn't teach him anything else. As the child walked away, he told Merlin to stop being so persistent because it was annoying. Mumbling that the brat was trash, he said that as the Demon King, he could slice anything at any moment. Sucking on his lollipop, Merlin thought he might need to find another way to earn money. Suddenly, someone in the crowd began proclaiming that only those with faith in the goddess of light would receive her protection. Looking back, Merlin saw a man who mentioned that a year ago the church had sent an army of 100,000 on an expedition to kill the Demon King. However, with just one attack, all were slaughtered. One of the girls mentions that the Demon King is a pervert, having heard that a year ago the heroine supposedly died after being corrupted by him. Surprised, the boy wonders what nonsense they're talking about and thinks that idiot might have been confused as he's not interested in flat boards. Meanwhile, the preacher says that Lucio is very powerful, also known as the strongest among the 7 demon kings. He warns that the demon species is highly invasive and Lucio II is violent and cruel, capable of invading territories and massacring everyone at any time. Especially since the sentient demon has never led an army to attack Britain, he explains this is yet another one of those demon threat theories. Raising his book, the old man says this is why everyone needs a Bible to strengthen their faith in the goddess of light, who rescues people from Lucifer's hands. He then shows several books, saying this edition of the Bible is unlimited and usually costs 10 gold coins, but now it's only 1. Suddenly, the crowd starts buying these Bibles, and the old man says anyone who doesn't buy the book isn't human. Clenching his fists in anger, Merlin mutters that these hypocrites are good at robbing citizens of their hard-earned money. Trembling with rage, he declares that what's even more unforgivable is that they don't give him any benefit after using his name like this. Sometime later, Merlin is speaking with a woman, saying that if her establishment needs someone to serve drinks, he's the best choice. In this case, he's job hunting. Extremely flustered, the woman wonders what she should do. Taking her hand with a charming smile, the boy tells her to consider hiring him. At that moment, she closes her eyes. Stammering, she says he's hired, and the blonde thanks her. Smiling, he notes that he didn't think a married woman like her would be so shy. Raising a finger, she says there's one last question, asking Merlin if he's a traveler from outside the village. The boy promptly answers yes. She explains that due to that, he can work there for a maximum of 2 months, after which he'll need to keep traveling. Nervous, he recalls that his heart's curse hasn't been lifted yet, so he needs to continue searching for strong beings to extend his life. Suddenly, the woman's demeanor changes as she adjusts her glasses. She begins doing calculations. Quickly, with her other hand, she grabs a pen. Watching her, the boy is impressed, noting she's experienced and very fast, doing 2 things at once. A few seconds later, the woman announces that with timeless function, he'll earn 1 gold coin per month with lodging and meals included. Additionally, he'll receive a 20% commission on each alcoholic drink he sells. After hearing this, the boy is stunned, as 1 gold coin is a lot. She then explains that in the afternoon, her pub opens exclusively for women, and that his job will be to sell drinks to them, which isn't an easy task. She concludes by saying she hopes he adopts some special measures to do this. Curious, he asks what she means by special measures. Embarrassed, she explains that he'll need to use sweet words or give relationship advice and may even go further with more intimate relations if necessary. Hearing this explanation, Merlin is completely shocked, as he didn't expect this. At this moment, the former Demon King realizes that he's fallen so low in this world that he has no other choice but to sell drinks with his body. It's essentially throwing away his strength and dignity as the monarch of pride. Reluctantly, he begins to respond. Smiling at his answer, the woman adjusts her glasses. She explains that if his sales go well, she'll give him a bonus at the end of the month. Excited, he embraces the misfortune of the poor. The proud Demon King chose profit after all. Waving his hand, he says he looks forward to working with her and calls her boss. Thus, the boy began his career as a gigolo in the pub, realizing that since no one knows him, his dark past won't spread. But he wonders if this will really be the case. The next day, someone arrives in a carriage. It's Alice, eating something. She sees the protagonist's wanted poster labeled Scottish Gigolo with a 5,000 bounty. However, she doesn't recognize who it is, as the poster is dirty with soil and has his face partially torn. A year ago, Alice's mithril armor, passed down through generations, was stolen, leading her to take out a substantial loan. To repay it, her only option was to register as an adventurer. Due to her identity as a heroine, she was directly promoted to gold class, and to pay off her loans, she took on countless missions over the past year. Despite the heavy debt, she had read about Merlin's extravagant lifestyle. And while repaying her loan, she also managed to secure a place to stay and occasionally buy herself a dress or 2. Returning to the present, she sees the wanted poster for a reward of 5,000 gold coins and wonders if this scam artist is really worth that much. She declares she's going to catch that Scottish gigolo right away. She thinks it'll be easy and a lucky find. With the reward money, she could buy many nice clothes and pay her rent. At that moment, she calls her donkey Sweet Pie. She tells him they're off to make money. However, she still doesn't know who this Scottish gigolo is. Sometime later at night in the pub, Merlin is dancing with a woman. He asks the lady if she would drink this wine for him, and she replies that she even die for him. Several people call him Little Daisy, saying they want a loving hug too. At that moment, he suggests they should all buy a drink. Completely smitten, these women start calling him Little Daisy. Observing, Alice remarks that she knew Mr. Merlin was popular with the ladies. Just then, her son approaches the woman. With a dirty face, he looks like he's been in a fight. Concerned, the woman asks if he fought with the other kids again. Suddenly, the boy starts pointing at Merlin, who quickly realizes what's happening. He declares that this is the useless uncle who only knows how to show off. Sometime later, they're sitting down for coffee. The boy's mother seems quite receptive to her employee. Arms crossed, the boy looks annoyed. Henry then points at Merlin, saying that he's useless and only knows how to show off, questioning why she let him work and dress like this in the pub. Apologetically, the mother explains that Henry must have caused trouble for the man. Smiling, Merlin replies that he loves children and bears no grudges, but in his mind he wonders what kind of brat would cause so much trouble if provoked. Annoyed, Henry says he didn't cause any trouble for anyone. Pointing at the blonde, he tells his mother that she really should stop associating with shady people like this guy. He warns her that because of this, that useless uncle went around bad-mouthing her, and now even the kids say she's a bad woman too. Disheartened, the woman asks Henry if he could stop doing this in front of Merlin. The protagonist understands that she's a young and beautiful single mother who suffers from bad rumors. Looking to the side, he deduces that Henry's dirty clothes are likely from fighting with kids who insulted his mother. Sighing, Merlin prepares to say something. He addresses Henry, telling him that if he wants to protect someone, he needs to get stronger. He explains that without any strength, he won't be able to silence others, and that if Henry truly wants to protect his mother, he should get stronger to shut others up. Pointing at Merlin, Henry retorts that Uncle Merlin is just a useless gigolo who relies on women and questions who he thinks he is to give advice. Declaring he won't waste time with Merlin's useless quick strike or whatever, he storms out of the house. The boy simply flees while his mother calls after him. Annoyed, the protagonist thinks that Brat is worthless. Meanwhile, in the pub, a trio is talking at a table while Lilith tries a glass. One of the men at the table questions if there are really goblins in this village. Another says he's heard that goblins live in the mountains behind the village, and the woman mentions that some time ago, a goblin's body was found outside the village. Listening to the story, the large man takes another drink. Laughing heartily, he says that's good and calls the waiter for another round. Ever accommodating, Merlin takes the order. With great flair, he brings the man a glass of wine. He quickly starts swirling the drink, performing with Oscar-worthy finesse. Being very seductive, he begins pouring the drink directly into the glass. With a smooth gesture, he hands it to his client, asking him to enjoy. Impressed, the client says he's really good at this, while his friend says he'll have another one as well. Showing gratitude, the blonde replies that it's a pleasure to serve them. Some time passes. Rufus calls his friend Logue, discussing the mission and mentioning that his share will be 2,000 gold coins. In shock, Logue asks why Rufus is getting the larger share. At that moment, his friend starts blushing. The girl also looks quite shy about the situation. Breaking the silence, the man explains with a smile that the two of them are getting married and will return to their homeland after the mission. This information leaves his friend completely shocked. Nervously, the blonde pays attention to the conversation, asking if they're really going back to their hometown to get married. His friend congratulates him, saying he always knew mages end up with swordsmen, feeling quite envious. In the background, Merlin grows concerned, muttering that this is a death flag. Interjecting, he politely asks if he could inquire about the mission details. The scurry man responds that the mission is to kill 100 goblins and cut off their ears. The big guy then asks if the boy is also an adventurer, to which the blonde replies no, saying he just wanted to know how dangerous their mission is. Rufus reassures him, saying that with a silver-class adventurer on a mission like this, there's no danger. The other adventurer agrees, saying they'll protect society for sure. Thoughtfully, Merlin understands it's just a few goblins. Being friendly, he thanks them in advance. After they finish eating at the bar, the group heads to another location, where they're fighting numerous goblins. The big guy with the scar defeats another one. Sighing, he remarks that these creatures are very weak and inferior. The groom then says there are only 37 more to go, reminding them to stay alert until it's over. Suddenly, a monster dragging its weapon along the ground appears. Looking to the side, excited, one of the adventurers says it's just a few more goblins. At that moment, the goblin prepares to pounce. The axe-wielding adventurer has his back turned. He says there's no need to be so serious, but when he looks up, he realizes it's a gigantic goblin. In just an instant, the giant monster crushes the adventurer. Witnessing this horrifying scene, one of his companions calls out for him. Cursing the goblin as a bastard, he demands to know how it dared to do that to his friend. Suddenly, an older goblin appears, smiling. He's sitting on the giant goblin's shoulder and welcomes the Goblin King, declaring that the adventurers are inferior beings. Seeing the two of them, the couple is completely terrified. The old goblin announces that he's the Prime Minister. the highest class goblin mage. In shock, the groom realizes he's high class and wonders why such a goblin is here. Sobbing with fear, his fiancée says they're going to die. Casting a fire spell, the goblin warns that the woman will serve his majesty. Launching this spell toward the groom, he says he'll be killed by them without a doubt. The groom tells the blonde to cover him as they fight their way out. The woman begins using her spells. She casts Fire Affinity Enhancement, Improved Agility, Blood Effect Enchantment, Improved Healing, and several other buffs. After all these upgrades, her fiancé is exuding energy and ready for battle. Extremely excited, he charges forward, yelling. His sword is engulfed in flames. Determined, the adventurer uses the explosive cross-slash ability. A huge flaming slash cuts through the air. Despite being just one strike, the boy already seems a bit tired. He reassures himself that they can do this to escape. However, a giant monster suddenly appears in front of him and quickly strikes him with its club. The blow is so powerful that it sends the boy flying. He crashes hard onto the ground. Worried, his fiancée calls out his name, Tron. Smiling, the old goblin tells his subordinates to grab the woman. The goblins begin pulling her as she screams for help. Lying on the ground and bleeding, Tron tells them to let her go. At that moment, the old goblin taunts him, asking if he wants to save her, saying he might only have one chance. The chance he's referring to is if Tron makes a small deal with the goblin. Meanwhile, back at the pub run by the woman with pink hair, the heroine Alice stands in front of the establishment, wondering if this is the best inn in town. She begins peeking inside. Several women are tittying up, saying that little Daisy won't show up if the stage isn't ready. Impressed, Alice remarks that this place is truly lively. Suddenly, a woman with pink hair approaches her, asking if it's Alice's first time here and noting that, judging by her outfit, she's likely from out of town. Alice responds that she's an adventurer and asks if there's a room available for the night, as she'd like to stay. The friendly attendant responds affirmatively and kindly invites her to follow. The two head up the stairs to Alice's future room, room 206. The pink-haired innkeeper tells her this will be the adventurer's room. She mentions that if Alice wants some entertainment, the best dancer will be performing tonight. The show is free and she's welcome to join them downstairs. Blushing, Alice remarks that it sounds fun and says she might check it out if interested, as it's supposed to be an exotic dance. Changing the subject, the adventurer pulls out a wanted poster and asks the innkeeper if she recognizes the person on it. The pink-haired woman observes it, commenting that since the face is covered, she can't be sure. She then bids Alice a good rest and leaves. Disappointed, Alice enters her room sighing. She says that, as expected, it won't be easy. At the same time, Merlin appears in the pub. Looking around, he wonders why he just heard the voice of that foolish heroine. He then shrugs it off, thinking it must be his imagination, as it's time for work. Meanwhile, Alice buries her face in the pillow. Happily, she says that after so many days of camping, she can finally have a good night's sleep. Blushing, she wonders when she'll meet her swordmaster from Elgin again. To repay her loan, Alice has been adventuring across the land over the past year. During her time at Elgin Port, she was once captured by pirates. Locked in a cage, Alice could only look on. Laughing, one of the pirates says they only planned to kidnap the Duke's daughter, but who would have thought the adventurer would offer herself while trying to rescue her? Another pirate warns that there are many beautiful women here and they're going to have fun tonight. Hearing this, several women start sobbing uncontrollably. Furious, Alice calls them scum. Still laughing, one pirate questions what's wrong with that, while his companion suggests they could start with her. Suddenly, someone appears, telling them to wait. Looking up, the red-haired pirate asks who's there. It's Lucifer, who warns them to prepare for trouble. Unable to see the person's face, Alice wonders who it is. She starts shouting, unable to see anything from inside the cage. One pirate says he's messing with the Redbeard pirates and remarks that he must be tired of living. Curious, the blonde asks if they're strong. The red-haired pirate responds that he and his Redbeard brothers are holy class experts, and no one in these waters can stand against them. He brags that they have a fleet of 17 warships, enough to face even the Imperial Navy easily. He explains that for that reason, an unknown person like the boy shouldn't be able to take their prisoners. Intrigued, the protagonist thinks he never imagined he'd encounter two holy class individuals while fleeing from debt collectors. Drawing his sword, he realizes their lives might help relieve his curse. Excited, he declares it's his lucky day, while the pirate warns his brother that it's time for this boy to die. The pirates charge at him, one wielding a sword and the other a type of magical scythe. With a deadly aura, the protagonist begins unsheathing his sword. He makes a swift slash, striking both the redhead and his bald brother. The blow is so powerful it shatters the helm into pieces, sending several pirates overboard. With just one strike, he defeats them all. Witnessing this scene, Alice is completely shocked and stunned. Back to the present, Alice hugs her pillow, recalling how cool the sword master was. She thinks that even though she didn't see his face, he must be a generous and calm person. Suddenly, she remembers she needs to write to her master. Alice picks up her pen to begin. She writes to her master, hoping this letter reaches her well. She mentions that she's so rich now that she doesn't have to worry about owing money to the church or taking out loans. She also writes that she even found a connection with the legendary swordmaster who, unlike her, has always been high-ranking and has a bright future ahead. She concludes by saying her master shouldn't worry about her and should take care of herself. She promises to visit once she reaches the peak of her life. After finishing this lovely and somewhat untruthful letter, she smiles. Some time passes. Alice sits in a chair saying she prays to God every day. She gently asks that she never crosses paths with that bastard Melly for the rest of her life. She calls him a pervert with a filthy mind and asks that he be punished, made so miserable he has no choice but to become a gigolo, losing everything for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Melly is performing and suddenly sneezes. He notices that every day around this time he sneezes and wonders if someone's been cursing him this whole time. Downstairs, several women call out for little Daisy. In the background, Alice sips her drink, wondering who this little Daisy is, noting that she can hear the women yelling from upstairs. Suddenly, a glass is placed next to her. It's Henry, who mutters that these women are all wet again. Smiling, the heroine corrects him, saying that's a strong word and he should notice how nicely dressed they are. Sighing in frustration, the boy insists that most of them have husbands yet come here anyway, calling them shameless. He explains that it's because of his mother running this kind of business that people gossip about her. Looking at him, Alice realizes he's the innkeeper's son. Surprisingly, Henry says that Winnie-san, big sister, is much better. He explains that unlike the women who throw themselves at Melly, someone pure like Winnie-san is a much better person. Blushing at the compliment, Alice asks if that's true. However, as he observes her closely, he notices something. He looks at the object attached to her belt. Upon seeing it, his eyes light up. Excited, he exclaims that Winnie-san is a gold-class adventurer, and that's really cool. Nodding, she confirms it. Impressed, he calls her amazing and asks if she's high-class, but she admits that she isn't. Pointing to her weapon, he asks if she could teach him how to use a sword, saying he really wants to learn. Hearing this request, Alice feels a bit flustered. Nervously, she wonders what to do and comments that without the proper training, it's impossible to learn the advanced ice sword arts. However, an idea crosses her mind. Affectionately, she pats the boy's head. She tells him she'll teach him, but first, he needs to drink more milk to make his body stronger. Seeing her response, the boy gets extremely excited. At that moment, he grabs his glass. Raising it, Henry starts drinking his milk while Alice watches. Henry then remarks that a high-class adventurer is indeed much sharper than a certain useless guy who only knows how to use a quick-draw technique to fool others. Curious, she asks who this useless guy is, and just then, the show begins. The protagonist appears, apologizing for the delay and announcing that the intermission is over and they'll be starting the second half. Upon hearing this, all the women begin swooning and blushing. Raising his arms and smiling, he declares it's showtime. Watching the performance, Alice wonders if this guy is little Daisy. Disappointed, Henry confirms that he is calling him that useless uncle who only knows how to quick draw. He explains that even though that uncle is a bit useless, he's a complete magnet for women, the perfect example of a gigolo. Realizing the situation, Alice begins to understand what's going on. Without a second thought, she draws her sword. She tells Henry that Winnie-san is going to apprehend the criminal and instructs him to stay here and not move. Mary, masked, senses someone's presence. Approaching cautiously, she believes he must be the Scottish gigolo wanted for fleeing his debts and orders him to come with her quietly. Analyzing her, the protagonist notes that she looks very much like that Irina Bogle, but her chest wasn't this big before. Annoyed, Irina tells him not to resist, but he simply tells her to relax. In that moment, he raises his hand toward her. Without a second thought, he ends up pressing that area. The girl becomes completely embarrassed, and Mary mutters that it's just padding, which doesn't surprise him. With a trembling voice, Alice can't say anything. Her hand shakes as she holds her sword. Lunging forward, she tries to strike him repeatedly, calling him a bastard, but the protagonist dodges easily. Deeply irritated, she yells that he should die as he continues evading. Lucifer tells her to wait and calm down, questioning what she'll do if she accidentally hurts someone. Furious, she declares she won't stop until she cuts off his hand. Seeing this, he merely sighs. Alice attempts a frontal strike with her sword, but the boy manages to jump. Demonstrating his skill, he steps onto her sword. With a bit of force, he sends it to the ground. Using his right hand, he holds the heroine's head. Calling her by name, he remarks that it's been a year, and it seems her temper has only worsened. He explains that given their shared history, she shouldn't be acting like this. Confused, the heroine asks what he means by our history and who he is. While removing his mask, he calls her Miss again and asks if she's forgotten the lovely nights they spent together on the boat crossing the strait. He adds that she was so crazy with passion for him that she stripped and asked for his embrace. Seeing the man without his mask, Alice is extremely surprised. With a sly smile, Merlin comments that she was young and pure back then, introducing himself as Merlin. In that moment, memories flood her mind, leaving her in shock. After the initial surprise, she screams loudly enough to startle even a distant cat. Back in the Moonlight pub, Lucifer continues to stare at the heroine after unmasking himself. He then asks Alice if she's forgotten the delightful nights they spent rowing together through the strait. Hearing this, the heroine starts to get angry. Gripping her sword tightly, She says that because of him, she's had to live in shame all year. Charging at him, she yells that Lucifer should die. However, the protagonist grabs her wrist. He tells Alice to calm down, reminding her that they are companions who crossed the strait together, and besides, all he did was steal from her. Killing him would be an overreaction. Tearing up, she glares at him, fuming. Seeing her murderous expression, the protagonist grows nervous and confused. In that moment, the heroine drops to her knees. Crying, she asks how he can be like this, saying that after stealing the most precious thing she had, he coldly fled, asking if he has any idea what she's been through. She says that because of his actions, she's had to work tirelessly, and if he considers himself a man, he'll have to take responsibility for what he did. In the background, the other women murmur that they never thought little Daisy would do something like this, while others call him scum. Henry, meanwhile, asks what Uncle Merlin did to Winnie San, saying he's disgusted. Uncomfortable with the situation, the protagonist insists it's a misunderstanding. Annoyed, Henry tells Merlin that he should be grateful someone like Winnie San even likes him. Spitting, he declares that Merlin is literally the scum of the earth. Hanging his head, the protagonist thinks he's an idiot, and that if he keeps talking like this, people will misunderstand everything, which will surely ruin his reputation. Resolving to prevent this, he realizes he has no other choice. Surprisingly, he steps toward the heroine and hugs her. Embarrassed, Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and Merlin explains that she needs to calm down, suggesting they put their issues aside and inviting her for a drink. He says they'll talk things over while enjoying a drink. Some time passes. The two of them sit at the bar. Lucifer mentions that all the customers have left and asks if they can finally talk. After downing another glass, Alice declares that iced milk is the best and asks Madame Martha for another. Lucifer then asks Alice if she really has to down her drink like that, commenting that it's very unladylike. Irritated, she tells him to stay out of her life and adds that she's still single, questioning if he's ever heard of someone called the Sword Master. The boy muses to himself that this Sword Master must be blind to fall for someone as foolish as her. In the background, Martha observes, thinking that Mr. Merlin is indeed popular with women, and that even his high-ranking adventurer seems to know him well. To her, the two practically look like a couple. Finishing drying the glasses, Martha approaches them. The protagonist calls her by name, saying that he'll take her son to bed and that they can take their time talking with Lady Alice. Lucifer then bids her good night. Opening her eyes, Martha wishes him the same and wishes him luck in making peace with Lady Alice. She leaves, humming a tune while the boy grows nervous. Merlin pours himself a glass of silvery drink, saying he should just return what he took so they can be even. With a memory like a goldfish, he asks what it was that he took. At this, Alice becomes visibly disappointed. She explains that the thing he stole was her mithril armor. He chokes on his drink, asking why she needs that, saying it's just chest padding, which makes her angry. She demands he return it and stay quiet. Unable to meet her gaze, he apologizes, admitting he already sold it. He goes on to explain that he used the money to bet on horses at the track and is now totally broke, leaving her in utter shock. Smiling, he says it's just an armor piece and she shouldn't be so stingy. Meanwhile, Alice trembles with rage, muttering that the armor is worth tens of millions in gold coins. Clenching her fist, she becomes extremely furious. Grabbing the Demon King by the collar, she shouts that it's easy for him to say. She insists that this isn't over until he returns that armor. The protagonist then takes hold of her wrist again. Smiling, he tells her she knows where he comes from and that the armor became his the moment he took it, adding that he can't help with returning it. He explains that the only thing he can offer is his life, saying he has nothing else to give. He declares that he's no longer the Demon King, so they're no longer enemies. His expression darkening, he tells her that if she's bent on taking his life, it would be a different story. With an ominous aura, he begins to unsheath his sword. Seeing this, Alice is completely shocked, breaking out in a cold sweat. Lucifer, however, begins to laugh. Not wanting to fight, he sheathes his sword. Alice remains utterly confused by what's happening. The boy returns to sipping his cold drink. Crossing his legs, he tells her not to worry, explaining that Miss Martha has been taking good care of him and that he has no intention of causing any trouble in her establishment. He adds that she was enjoying her drink just a moment ago, but now she's ruined the atmosphere. He suggests that she should be using her pen instead of her sword. Hearing this, Alice falls into silent contemplation. She wonders if he's truly so strong that she couldn't simply take back the mithril armor. But he responds, explaining that demons have a strict sense of justice and intimacy. For them, a contract is a sacred agreement made between two willing parties. Not quite convinced, Alice asks why he cares about such things if he's no longer a demon king. He explains that even though he's no longer a demon king, he's still a former monarch of pride and won't steal an item he already sold. Then he asks why she, as a hero, is stooping to cursing him and trying to take something back from him. With her head down, she replies that she's no longer a hero either. She explains that the armor was a loan from the church, and after it was stolen, she became someone who owes them tens of thousands of gold coins. Merlin responds that if she works hard, she'll be able to pay it off someday. Annoyed, Alice says she'll have to take on S-rank missions, where the rewards are in the tens of thousands of gold coins, but they're extremely dangerous. Hearing that an S-rank mission reward is in the tens of thousands of gold coins, Merlin starts to tremble. Excited, he asks Alice if it's really true. Confirming, Alice explains that rank S missions generally have many dangers, and it's not uncommon to encounter holy class enemies. It's a high-risk, high-reward job. Irritated, she says that even so, she'll still have to complete thousands of missions before she can pay off her debt, and it's all the protagonist's fault. Laughing, Lucifer says it seems like he's already found his next job. Do you know the benefits of becoming an adventurer? One of them is easily finding holy class enemies, which can extend your lifespan. Earning lots of gold coins, making it perfect for living a carefree life. Excited, Merlin concludes that this job is perfect for him. Determined, he calls for Miss Alice. With a passionate look, he asks what he needs to do to become an adventurer. Looking at him disdainfully, she explains that anyone with aura or mana can become an adventurer. After all, in his mind, he realizes he has neither, so he asks if there's another way. In response, she says that a recommendation from an active adventurer also works, but then immediately asks why he's asking this. Taking her hands, he goes to Lady Alice, commenting that they're like twins and asks if she could recommend him, saying he also wants to be an adventurer. Hearing all of this, the girl is in shock. Tearing up, she questions why she would do that for him, and the protagonist explains that she shouldn't be so stingy and that they're just two people in the same boat. Pointing her finger angrily, she tells him not to even think about it, and that there's no way she'd recommend trash like him. He comments that it's just a recommendation and that it's not as if she'd lose anything by doing it, but the girl remarks that someone like him shouldn't even become an adventurer. Both end up annoyed with each other, and that night they part on bad terms. Then a few days pass. At work, Merlin is drying the glasses. Suddenly, he sighs, likely showing frustration at still not being able to become an adventurer. Martha then calls him asking if he's seen Henry, and the boy responds that he hasn't. Worried, she says she hasn't seen him since yesterday and wonders where he could be, letting him know she'll go outside to look for him. However, she notices something strange. Approaching, the blonde asks why she looks so down. In response, he asks what she thinks about the adventurer profession. In reply, she says it's a profession where danger and hope coexist, and that on the one hand, he could make a fortune by completing high-level missions. At that moment, he says, "So that's it," and begins to laugh. Interested, she asks if he's found what he wants to do and if he's planning to become an adventurer like Lady Alice. Sighing, he says yes, but he doesn't have a license and that damn Alice doesn't want to recommend him. Martha then tells him not to say such things. Saying it's probably because his words didn't move her heart, she tells him she's rooting for both and wishes the protagonist good luck. However, something begins to worry her. Curious, the boy just observes her. Suddenly, Martha takes his hand. Then she tells Merlin that if he becomes an adventurer, he should make sure not to accept any of those dangerous missions. She explains that even though he carries his sword, he's a person without mana, very weak, and at high risk of losing his life that way, but he says he's very strong. Outside, a big thunderbolt appears, making a loud noise. At that moment, it starts to rain. Taking an umbrella, Martha says she's going to look for Henry and asks her employee if he can watch the shop, and he responds that he can. Looking up, he wonders how the 6 silver adventurers from before are doing at this moment. Near the kingdom, someone approaches. It's a redhead who's completely injured and asking if anyone is there. One of the guards ends up hearing a man's voice. Looking out the window, he informs him that the gates are closed for the night and that he should leave now. Explaining, the man says he's an adventurer who left the village not too long ago, and he politely asks to be let in because all his companions are dead and he's injured. The guard then notes that he's very wounded and the other tells him to open the gates. Following the order, the gates are quickly opened. One of the men approaches, asking why he's standing there, and orders him to come in quickly. Trembling with fear, the adventurer starts apologizing, saying they should forgive him for this and that he only wanted to save his fiancée. The guard looks confused, asking what he's talking about. Looking up, he notices the presence of a giant goblin, and the old man comments that this was too easy. Both guards are completely terrified by what they're seeing. A large army of armed goblins appears. An elder gives orders to the goblin warriors, saying their prey is the village ahead, that they should kill all the men and steal all the women. With a disgusting expression, the goblins tell the warriors to offer the precious treasures to the king. Desperate, the guards run, shouting that it's a goblin invasion and that the goblins have invaded. At that moment, the adventurer fiancé says he's fulfilled the agreement and that, in return, they should give her back. Looking back, an elder smiles, saying he did a great favor by opening the gates for them, but he shouldn't think he'll get that woman back as she now belongs to the king. Then the elder begins to conjure his fire magic, launching it toward the hero, who ends up burning completely, with that old goblin being the last thing he saw in his life. Entering the place, one of the goblins starts laughing, saying that humans should be afraid. At this moment, the sea bell starts ringing as if it were some kind of alarm. Its sound is so loud that it echoes throughout the kingdom. Curious, the villagers start talking among themselves. Opening a window, a citizen wonders what's happening and asks if this came from the wall army. Above him, a goblin armed with a sword approaches. He quickly strikes the unsuspecting citizen. His attack was fatal, resulting in the man's death. At that instant, everyone realizes it's a goblin invasion. Quickly, many of them appear and people begin to call for help. Everyone screams and tries to escape as the goblins attack. In no time, the city is engulfed in flames while the bell keeps ringing. Alice is eating an apple, and at that moment, she notices something strange happening. In front of her, a large black smoke forms. Nervously, she wonders what could be happening. Meanwhile, the citizens begin to run for their lives. A man tells her to flee, saying they're coming. Still confused, she wonders what's going on as she sees everyone fleeing. Placing a hand on her shoulder, the old man tells the lady that she must run now. She wonders if it's a fire since she can use her ice magic now. However, an arrow suddenly approaches, hitting the old man who was trying to help her just moments ago. His blood splatters on her face, leaving her in complete shock. Then the man's body falls near her feet. The one-eyed goblin who shot the man with the bow starts laughing as his companions cheer. Smiling, the archer prepares for another attack. However, looking at his hand, he notices it's freezing. Desperate, he tries to move, and it causes his hand to shatter. Quickly, his entire body cracks and breaks into many pieces. All the goblins start getting nervous upon seeing the heroine. She's emanating a murderous aura from everything that's happened. Feeling a lot of anger, the goblins charge at her. Drawing her sword, Alice warns them to come at her without blinking, because if they blink, they won't know what hit them. Ignoring her warning, the goblins rush forward with their swords. The heroine then prepares to strike. She begins using her ice magic toward the monsters. Launching dozens of ice crystals toward the goblins, she easily defeats them. Lurking, one of them is holding a crossbow aiming at the heroine. At that instant, he fires in her direction. However, the arrow ends up hitting a very resilient ice crystal. Not understanding what's happening, the goblin is extremely confused since the heroine was in his sights just a moment ago. It turns out she created a large ice shield resembling a wing. At that moment, Alice begins to levitate. The heroine has created 2 fantastic ice wings. Determined, she declares that in the name of justice, she will send all the monsters back to hell. Looking at the scene, all the goblins are terrified and horrified. Fighting for survival, they shout that they must kill her and start shooting. Without fleeing from the battle, she charges forward. And as she passes near the goblins, she begins using her ice magic again. All are frozen within extremely resistant ice crystals. Meanwhile, at the Moonlight Pub, one of the women calls Mary Little Daisy, asking him to tell more. Laughing, he questions why he would lie to cute girls like them. Suddenly, he starts hearing screams saying they're here and we need to run. Changing the subject, he apologizes to the ladies and comments that something seems to be happening outside, so he'll go check it out. One of the women argues that it's probably a couple's fight and they should ignore it, and another says it's normal for couples to fight these days and that they should just carry on. However, a shadow approaches the door. With just one kick, it manages to break it down completely. This startles the 2 girls and surprises the protagonist. It's a trio of goblins who entered armed and ready to fight. Seeing goblins invading, the girls become frightened. These little monsters are exuding a dark energy with a frightening and disgusting look. Irritated, Merlin questions why these green-skinned monsters are here of all places. In the middle of the chaos, the boy's mother runs desperately. Exhausted from running, worried, she wonders where her son is. Excited, the boy at the bar is playing with his Meg doll. Playing with his friends, he says that the adventurer said she would teach him powerful sword techniques. The other 2 boys are surprised. The child from the bar says he'll become an adventurer to protect his mother, and his friend asks about the noise outside. One of them asks what's happening. The group is shocked by what they see outside. He hears his mother calling out, asking where he is. Searching for her son, the boy's mother says it's very dangerous out there and tells him to go home. Terrified, Henry begins calling for his mother. However, he is shocked by what he sees before his eyes. His mother is surrounded by several goblins. They laugh at her with great malice. The goblins then knock her down and tie her up to kidnap her. Her son, desperate, calls out for his mother repeatedly. He runs out and tells his friends he's going to save her. The 2 warn him that if he goes, he'll die and the goblins will eat his flesh. As his mother is taken away, he shouts for them to let her go. At that moment, he calls for the owner. She hears him, but there's nothing she can do. In the bar, the goblin invasion continues. Merlin approaches the goblin that invaded, ready to end him. In a confident tone, he warns the green-skinned monsters not to come around when he has guests to attend to. He looks deep into the creature's soul and calls him insolent. The goblin screams, realizing it's over for him, and the gigolo finishes him off. Tired, he's surprised by what he's seeing. More and more goblins keep arriving to ruin his day. Lucifer Ayev finds himself surrounded by goblins and wonders what's happening. Convinced they'll defeat him, they know to stop laughing. One of them then shouts, ordering them to kill him. They all charge at him simultaneously. Without any fear, Merlin says they're not even worthy of a dance. He finally draws his sword from its sheath. With a single sword swing, he creates enough wind to push all the goblins back. They end up disoriented by this. Finally, sheathing his sword again, he tells the goblins he'll help these horrible creatures with their last tributes to society. The goblin, frightened, wonders what's happening, and at that moment, he begins to swell up until all these green beings simply explode like fireworks. Back at the goblin base, one of the commanders is very pleased, believing that soon all humans will be completely wiped out in his view. One of the lackeys then arrives in a panic, telling the Prime Minister that all the troops in the West were annihilated. He is startled by this news and becomes very worried, asking if there was a high-ranking presence there. The lackey then replies that there was no one of high rank and that he didn't feel any human aura there. He only saw a common human with blonde hair and red eyes. The Prime Minister is very angry at what he heard and says all goblins need is women. Then the lackey agrees, saying he's absolutely right. He ponders that it doesn't make any sense for a mere human to have wiped out all the Western forces. At this moment, the servant says he saw with his own eyes that the man didn't even unsheath his sword properly and annihilated the entire army in the blink of an eye. The soldiers sent to the main fortress were also annihilated, and they were left full of ice spikes hanging, and also that the silver-haired girl's sword is heading their way. The minister then decides that the goblins must relocate immediately. Loudly, he orders all troops to retreat. One of them then murmurs that the army can be rebuilt as long as they have all the women they kidnapped. And so we see the little boy's mother hoping that Henry is safe. Overlooking the chaos, Alice notices that the goblins are retreating. She becomes anxious, as the rain might completely erase their tracks. The heroine sets out on a mission, determined not to let them take the girls away. Many move to attack the silver-haired woman. She defends herself using her power. Backing away from the goblin, the heroine shouts for him to get out of the way or something very bad will happen to him. In turn, the goblin ignores her and starts growling. Several of them charge at her once again. Alice unleashes her ice spell against the goblin, hitting him directly. And after that, she finishes him off, tearing him apart. She realizes it was just a distraction and that the rest of the goblins have fled. Looking around, she sees the despair of everyone who has lost their families. She thinks it's best to stay where she is, as the goblins won't get their hands on those who were just captured. The city bell rings. One of the villagers says there's a chief calling for an assembly, and another wonders what he wants at this moment. People start gathering at the designated spot. The assembly chief then asks everyone to gather because many people were captured and taken to the mountains, adding that they need to think of something to do. Unfortunately, he adds that even as the village chief, this isn't something he can decide alone. One of the villagers, already hopeless, says everyone should forget what happened as there's nothing anyone can do. In this conversation circle, one citizen says everyone saw how brave those goblins were, and there's nothing more to do for those who were taken. Someone, outraged by what they heard, asks if he's kidding. It's the boy Henry. Very angry, Henry says his mother was taken by the goblins. He tries to convince them, saying that the goblins took their families too and that those families are waiting for them. He insists that they must rescue the girls. He says it's time for them to shed blood for them, and if they don't, they'll certainly go to hell. The pastor arrives, saying that this is nonsense. The men are surprised to see the pastor. He then says that no one present will go to hell because the goddess of light will be merciful to the wise. He asks if they have a solution to the problem, and the men ask for help. He says he forgives everyone and frees them from their sins in the name of the goddess of light. The citizens begin to pray to the goddess of light. Holding the Bible, he says they are all too weak to face those goblins and that it would be foolish to try, but they can stay where they are and pray. He continues, saying that the goddess will help those who pray sincerely, and she will deliver salvation to those who were captured. He also warns that those whose families were taken should get a copy of the Bible to strengthen their faith so that their families will return safely. One of the men then asks if people will come back if they buy the Bible, questioning if it's really true. The villager stands up and shares his testimony, saying that he too was once captured by the goblins, but he prayed sincerely to the goddess of light, and now he's fine. Everyone around is surprised and astonished, asking if he's telling the truth and if it's truly possible to escape those monsters. The man replies, of course, that those monsters trembled with fear the moment he took the Bible, and people believe in his testimony. They start pleading for the goddess's help, condemning themselves for not buying dozens and dozens of Bibles. One of them even asks if they're selling Bibles right now. The villager and the pastor look at each other as if it were all planned. Excitedly, the pastor starts offering all his Bibles. He assures them not to worry, that he always carries dozens and dozens of Bibles with him, and that they're very affordable, only 100 gold coins. Many of them fall for the pastor's spiel, except for the son of the woman who was taken. He says everyone has gone crazy, and that this is no time to fall for charlatans. At this, the man tells the boy to shut up, saying it's the only way to save everyone. The boy retorts, saying that the longer they wait, the more dangerous it gets, and if anything happens to the women, they'll certainly go to hell. Then he calls the pastor a fraud, crying in utter desperation, and shouts that they are all being deceived and that no one will be saved. The heroine arrives and tells Henry that he's already done enough. She calls them hypocrites and orders them to stop this nonsense and leave. The pastor then asks where this woman came from and who she is, asserting that this woman should burn at the stake for tainting their prayers. She finally reveals who she is. She simply explains that she is a gold-ranked adventurer, the 233rd hero of the Vatican, named Alice Claudia. Everyone in the room is shocked and shouts that she is the heroine. He then lies about her, saying that she is a disgrace to the Vatican, that she failed in the expedition to the first demon castle, and that she lay with Lucifer. However, the girl retorts, saying she's not here to talk about the past. She's here to put an end to the lies he's spreading to the people, and she tells him directly that if the Pope heard this, he would certainly be disappointed in the pastor. He then replies that she is a disgrace to the church, asking how she dares to criticize him and claiming that prayer is the only possible salvation. After hearing all this nonsense, the heroine becomes furious and draws her sword. Pointing the sword's tip right at the pastor's throat, she tells him that if he truly believes the goddess will hear his prayers, then why doesn't he pray for his life right now? Risk his life to prove his beliefs. The old man falls to his knees, begging for forgiveness. At this, the girl tells him to disappear and curses him. She begins a speech saying she knows that everyone fears death and feels powerless to act, even when those closest are taken. In the end, they cling to false hopes. The silver-haired girl continues, saying that what they're doing is running away, which is a cowardly decision. The gods won't help the foolish. In life, there are many things one can't give up on just because they seem impossible. The people who were taken are waiting to be saved, and they are the only ones who can save them. The boy at the bar is overjoyed to see her giving this speech. He murmurs that she's really cool. Alice finishes her speech, saying they have two choices at this moment. They can choose to stay here and live with guilt until the day they die, or they can pick up their swords and fight. She then asks the village chief to show her the way to the goblin nest. Merlin says yes, but there's one thing. He mentions that the Goblin King is a holy rank being. She remains calm and replies that it's fine, insisting that he tell her where they are. In the bar, Lucifer is comforting the women, trying to reassure them, saying not to worry, and that as long as they stay by his side, they'll be safe. The blonde insists that he protect her and calls him Little Daisy. He responds naturally, but then realizes that Martha went looking for little Henry a long time ago and becomes concerned because she hasn't returned yet. Suddenly, her son arrives, panting and quickly running off. Lucifer, confused, asks Henry where he's been and also questions where the boy's mother is. The boy then enters his room, grabs a sword, and tells Merlin that it's nothing that concerns him, saying he's going to save his mother. The blonde then realizes something happened to Martha. He rushes out, telling the boy not to bother him because he's very busy. Merlin questions how he could be busy and says all the boy knows how to do is create problems. At this moment, he grabs the boy by the collar of his jacket. Angry, the child tells him to get his hands off because he's just a useless person, and then decides he will save his mother. Lucifer then says he's too young to do anything and asks him just to explain what's happening. The boy starts crying and blames himself, saying his mother was taken because of him, and he has to save her with his father's sword. Then the demon tells him to know his place, saying the boy is nothing more than a weak little kid, incapable of doing anything in a fight. Henry explains that he made a promise to his father and adds that he is the man of the house while his father is away, and that he promised to protect his mother. Upon hearing this, Merlin is taken back to his past, remembering when he was with his mother and the little boy who said he would definitely protect her when he got older, and he finds himself laughing at this memory. As he snaps out of this flashback, the little boy has already run off. The blonde murmurs that all fools really know how to do is cause trouble for others. The three women, not understanding, call him by his nickname. Returning to his usual character, he tells the ladies to leave this place as soon as dawn breaks. They become worried. The green-haired one asks if he's leaving and warns that it's too dangerous for him to go out at this hour. Then he gets ready to leave and says that sometimes he feels that maybe being a hero could actually be a good thing. Alice arrives at the adventurer's base, then spots a man nearly dying on the ground and asks if he's alright. On his knees, the man begins apologizing. She tells him not to speak if the villagers are already coming. At this moment, the adventurer finally sees that she's a gold-ranked adventurer. The man then grabs her hand, begging for his fiancé's life and blaming himself for letting the goblins in. He says he had no choice and asks her to please forgive him. Outraged by what he just said, she tells him to lift his head and says adventurers should act with dignity at all times. She tells him that she will have to take his adventurer's badge for now. The heroine asks the name of his fiancé. The man replies, Cecil. At that moment, the heroine then promises that his adventurer's badge will be returned to him by Cecil herself. Surprised, he warns her that the Goblin Emperor is a holy class being and urges her to be careful. Heading toward the goblins, Alice says she's nowhere near her opponent's level, but that doesn't matter. The silver-haired girl thinks that those without talent should know their limits and keep their feet on the ground. She will never agree with his words, no matter how many times she hears them, and even in the face of despair, she believes she must trust herself. Inside the Goblin Palace, many women are held captive, including Martha. The monstrous Goblin King is delighted to see the women in such good shape. He orders his lackeys to throw them into the dungeon, saying he'll enjoy each one tonight after his bath, and his lackey simply obeys. The king praises the prime minister and asks if he would like a reward. Gargamel replies that he needs no reward, as serving his majesty is reward enough. Laughing heartily, the king replies, as expected from my most trustworthy prime minister. The prime minister responds that it's an honor to have his majesty's trust. Then the king says there's nothing more, dismissing Gargamel and explaining that he'd like to take a bath now. His subordinate, Gargamel, simply follows the order. He gives instructions to the lackeys to gather the soldiers and prepare an ambush. The prime minister announces that humans will arrive in great numbers tonight, so they'll set up an ambush. The lackeys praise him, flattering him. Incredible, absolutely incredible, just as expected from Lord Gargamel. And pleased, he replies, of course. A disgusting green creature spots white things coming toward them. Not understanding, Gargamel asks if they're those magical beasts, and his servant says they aren't beasts, but suddenly he's interrupted by the ice of the swordswoman. The Lord orders them to call the giant goblin to stop the annoying girl. However, it's too late, as she's already very close. The heroine arrives, freezing everything without caring to listen to anyone. In an instant, she freezes everything. They become deeply irritated. With great confidence, the goblin tells her not to cause trouble, calling her little girl while forming a fireball. The silver-haired girl simply tells the monster to get lost and stomps on his face, pushing him into the wall. The lackeys are at a loss for what to do, as even Lord Gargamel has been defeated. She just looks at them with disdain, and they're frozen in fear, not literally. At this moment, she heads off to find the women inside the castle. She hears a strange noise. Suddenly, 2 mutant goblins appear in front of her. Mutant 1 charges, attacking her with his hammer. Quick and agile, the girl dodges and swiftly freezes them both, rendering them immobile. Before striking, she warns them that they must be the last ones she'll face, and if they value their lives, they should get out of her way. While battling, she shouts that this nightmare will end when the fiancé escapes and everything will return to normal. The blonde cries, hoping that this truly happens. And the speech continues. She talks about how they will be able to plan their wedding and have children, encouraging her to escape from this terrible place. After this encouragement, Alice seals herself in an ice room with the Ogre King. Cecil calls out the warrior's name, worried about her. Inside the room, the Great Goblin is confident that this will be an easy battle. Wounded and exhausted, the Ice Swordswoman listens to the green monster. He says that she's risking her life just to stop him and reveals that he views humans differently because he is the king. Annoyed, the king offers her 2 choices. Either she drops her sword and becomes his comfort, or she fights him to the end. Before he can continue, he's interrupted. The brave woman tells him to stop talking and chooses the second option. In her thoughts, she understands that he feels no affection and is simply a cruel and rude being. The only man she truly admires is the master swordsman. After she chooses the second option, the terrible king calls her a fool and says he will teach her a lesson after he captures her. She doesn't hesitate and prepares to attack. With her power, the girl floats and her aura spreads, making her opponent wary. Slightly frozen, the crowned one scoffs, asking if this is the heroine's final move and concluding that he expected something stronger than a weak breeze. Ignoring his taunt, she simply says she won't give him the chance and demands he die by her sword. As she says this, she remembers her training from when she was a child. The little girl, exhausted, asks her trainer why she needs to practice this particular piercing technique. The hooded woman explains that this is a skill the child needs to learn to survive and that it's the key to turning the tide in a desperate situation. Curious, the girl asks if, with this simple attack, she'll be able to defeat a holy class expert. The answer is that most holy class beings are human and that with a direct thrust, she can pierce their heart, making it a potentially fatal blow. Additionally, the lineage of the Great Mountain practices both magic and martial arts, increasing the chances of striking the opponent. Even if they don't die, they'll be incapacitated. The future heroine says it's not easy to strike a holy class being. Her trainer replies that it will depend on her intelligence, as she can launch a surprise attack, use poison, steal, threaten, or even kidnap them. And if none of that works, she can simply strip and seduce them, asking why she's so rigid. Embarrassed, the girl says her teacher is talking about strange things again. Returning to the present, the warrior is about to use the techniques she learned. She braces herself, takes a leap, and attacks. Meanwhile, back to the red-haired boy. The giant insults him, saying he never expected a rat like Henry to enter the palace. Offended, Henry curses and demands his mother back. Without mincing words, the goblin attempts to strike him with deadly intent. The poor boy, unsure of what to do, stands still, accepting his fate while crying in despair. But nothing happens. When he opens his eyes, he sees Merlin in front of him, and the monster, who was intact moments ago, is now split in 2. Naturally, the giant dies from this attack, falling to the ground. Shocked by what he just witnessed, Henry calls out his uncle's name. In his thoughts, he realizes just how powerful his acquaintance is. The monster didn't even have a chance to defend itself. The blonde praises his bravery and says he'll give him 99 out of 100 points, but he takes away those 99 points for coming to such a dangerous place alone, and with a smile, concludes that Henry still has 0 points after all. Surprised, the boy thinks it's true that his friend is a strong swordsman. Now, admiring him, he's glad to be proven wrong, realizing Merlin wasn't just bragging the whole time. Seeing the boy's expression, the swordsman asks if he's alright. Henry grabs his leg, and of course the response comes with a yes and an immediate request for training. Annoyed because he's only now being recognized for his skills, Merlin says he wanted to teach him earlier, but Martha's son refused to learn, so now he won't teach him. The boy kneels, begging to be trained. Lucifer rubs it in, saying he knew the kid would kneel and beg if he asked, and tells him to stand up for having mocked his quick draw. A familiar voice calls out to the 2 of them. The 2 turn around to see who it is. It's Martha and the other women. They're overjoyed to see her. The boy runs into his mother's arms, telling her he was worried about her. She replies that she's fine and that Alice saved them, but questions why he's in such a dangerous place. Martin says it was Uncle Merlin who brought him here. He's really strong because he defeated the giant. The swordsman thinks about how much of a brat this boy is, considering that with this information, she might reduce his pay. Concerned, Martha asks if it's true and if he can go help Alice. She's fighting the Emperor alone just to save all of them, and she's worried Alice may not be a match for the king. Back in the dungeon, we can see the sword falling. The goblin lets out a sincere laugh. Confused, Alice wonders how he found her. The answer is that he already knew the snowstorm was just a cover. He had anticipated it and now grabs her. The bearded goblin says it's irritating to see the silver-haired woman jumping around and adds that since she's going to die, she should at least show where she'll bleed. His giant hands squeeze her tightly, making her scream in pain. The women are both euphoric and worried. The redhead asks if Merlin can help. Alice is fighting alone to save them, and surely she's no match for the king. Confused, he asks why he should save her. In a moment of clever thinking, he realizes that if he saves the warrior, he might have a chance to become an adventurer. Martha insists and says she'll triple his salary. Pretending not to care about the money, the blonde asks who she thinks he is. They both agree that he definitely looks like someone who does everything for money. The swordsman decides he has nothing to lose if he lends her a hand. Mother and son wish him luck, saying that when he returns, he can teach the boy. In a grand exit, he tells them to wait because he'll be back with Alice. The king squeezes her so tightly that the heroine starts losing air. He laughs wickedly, delighted to see her face and hear her voice weakening, which stirs his desires for her. Despite her lack of strength, she manages to use her power, driving an ice stalactite into one of his arms. Not understanding where it came from, the vile old goblin looks to the ceiling. Confused, he asks when she managed to do that. Without answering, she simply triggers the power that causes it all to collapse on him. Being immobilized, he releases her, letting the girl go free. Furious, he asks how she dares to deceive him. All of this was just to teach him not to underestimate her strength. Now it's time for him to experience the sword art of the Great Mountain. She charges toward the immobilized goblin. In no time, he's slashed all over by her ice magic and her sword. Alice makes sure to drive her blade through the Great King's neck. Finally, the ice ultimatum arrives to finish him off. A large hole appears in his body. Relieved, she feels a sense of peace seeing this monster die. Just as she's about to leave, she feels a glow from behind. Confused, she's caught by surprise. The Goblin King is regenerating from the wound she inflicted. Shocked by what she sees, she wonders if the wound to his heart has healed. And before she knows it, he's revived, stronger than before. In shock, Alice begins to question why the monster didn't die, as it was a direct fatal blow to the heart, and usually even a holy class being wouldn't survive that. However, the king laughs in the face of danger and explains that goblins' hearts are on the right side, not the left. After pointing out that she didn't study enough, he adds that knowledge can change one's fate, and now, having underestimated him, he will show her no mercy. Speechless, she just stares at him. With his massive club, he charges at her, yelling for her to die already. In defense, she creates an ice barrier. But an ice wall can't block his attack, and she's hit with full force. The strike is so powerful that even the dungeon beams crack. This time, she's really hurt. Powerless, she lies on the ground, seized by the king. The vile goblin tells her that from now on, she'll be his slave forever. Unfortunately, she can do nothing but groan in pain and suffering. Then the king is taken aback by something. The girl has vanished from his arms, and looking behind, he sees who took her away. The goblin then realizes that another rat has entered his underground city and feels something strange. His body has been sliced in half without even noticing, leaving him utterly confused as to how it happened. The green monster, enraged, calls Lucifer a bastard. Looking closely at the girl, Merlin questions if she was serious about what she did, as she risked everything for people who have nothing to do with her. He tells her that she didn't need to go so far as to risk her own life. That's foolishness. As he places her in a slightly safer spot, the swordsman continues, saying he's not used to seeing her so compliant and asks her not to die just yet. Since she can't respond, he goes on, telling her he won't mock her and wishes the flat-chested heroine good rest, as he'll take it from here. Dazed, the silver-haired girl starts to see in him the swordsman she fell for because of his strength and wonders if he's come to save her again. Half-conscious, she thinks of the master swordsman and ends up saying out loud in a soft voice that she likes him very much. The blonde is startled, confused by what he just heard, wondering what that idiot is talking about. At this moment, the goblin asks if he's ready because he wants to start the game once and for all. They start conversing. The king says he thought only one rat had entered his palace and didn't expect another one to show up. He continues, noting that Merlin seems quite strong, considering he sliced off his hand without giving him time to react. However, his body regenerates, and when he's in berserk mode, he can recover from any damage all at once. He then invites Merlin to fight, as that's the only way he'll die. Pleased by the challenge, Lucifer boasts that he can defeat anyone with a single move and that being defeated is exactly what he desires. Upon hearing this, the goblin smiles and launches into the attack. He swings his club at the young blonde. However, the man is so strong that he withstands the full impact. Surprised, the goblin says Merlin is indeed very strong to withstand his attack and asks his name. Convinced, the young man replies that the green monster doesn't deserve to know his name with his level of skill. The king introduces himself first, saying he's one of the 14 goblin emperors and a talented figure among his race. His plan is to launch a large-scale attack on Wales, soon to become the new ruler of humans. He then offers Merlin the position of prime minister, which would make him the second emperor. Merlin laughs, finding it amusing that the goblin wants him to join his side, and questions where this green creature got all this courage. With all this style, he adds that no one in this world, even if the goddess of light herself descended, could look directly at a millionth of his glory. He finishes by saying he would feel humiliated to use the goblin as fertilizer in his garden. The king is enraged by what he just heard. He then gathers all his strength and leaps at the demon. Furious and without a second thought, he jumps straight at the blonde, saying he asked for this. To make things worse, Lucifer begins mocking the vile green monster, saying he's as fat as a pig yet manages to soar so high. Growing angrier, the goblin readies himself to deliver the strike of his life, wishing for this arrogant man to be sent to hell. Just as he's about to strike with all his might, the devil merely chuckles at the spectacle unfolding. The king slams his club into the ground, saying that even a high-ranking person would die horribly from that attack. Lucifer appears, asking if that was his strongest move. Unable to believe what just happened, the goblin sees this small figure standing on top of his club, telling him it's now his turn. Merlin fully unsheaths his sword and splits the ugly monster in two. As this happens, the king realizes the young man's power and feels something strange. He's been split in half, and his regenerative power isn't enough to heal him. The blonde says he was curious about who started this mess, but the king has disappointed him with how weak he is. Frightened, the goblin asks who he is because he's clearly not an ordinary human. The response is that the man isn't particularly strong. It's the king who is far too weak and doesn't deserve to be called as such, nor does he have the right to compete on the same stage as him. The young man is pleased to have finished him off, as being a holy rank, a curse on his heart is eased. A wall cracks after all this fighting. Inside it is full of goblin treasures. Just as he's about to take the girl back, he hears the sound of everything collapsing. Merlin can't believe what he sees. It's a massive amount of treasure. He loves the feeling of being blinded by the shine of gold coins and wonders if his dream of becoming a vagabond might come true. However, a large brick falls on his head, and looking up, he realizes the ceiling is crumbling. He concludes that the battle must have caused the underground city to collapse. Faced with a dilemma, he thinks that if he moves quickly, he can take a lot of gold with him, but he won't be able to save the girl. And even though he might be fine with that, she would die buried. At that moment, he begins to question whether he should choose the gold or the girl, and ultimately decides on the girl. He saves Alice just as everything falls apart and runs out with her. As they run, he declares that she's his nemesis, that she now owes him millions of gold coins, and that he won't forgive her if she doesn't recommend him for a job. When they arrive in the village, the men happily welcome their families, until they see the mountain exploding. Someone shouts that part of the mountain has collapsed, and another asks if that was where the goblin's underground palace was. The little boy worries about his two friends. His mother puts a hand on his shoulder to calm him and tells him not to worry, as Merlin is clever and always figures things out. The boy agrees with his mother, but the man is startled by what he sees. Amidst the smoke, a familiar silhouette appears. It's Merlin and Alice coming out together. All the villagers run to see what happened. He's praised by everyone. One says they misjudged him, another says he's not a useless gigolo, someone else says he's impressive and he really saved everyone, making him very happy. But inside, he hopes not to be the hero again and only wishes for all the gold he left behind. Later, Alice continues to rest in bed. The new hero observes her and notes that she's severely injured and will be in danger if no one treats her. He smirks wickedly, saying she treated him poorly before, but now all she can do is lie there and let him do whatever he wants, because that's karma. He adds that he never thought he'd get a day to tease her like this. Clearing his throat as he realizes he shouldn't be saying that, he quickly changes the subject, telling her he's not taking advantage, just treating her. After some time, Alice finally wakes up startled. In her thoughts, she's trying to remember what happened to her after the Goblin King struck her, but she can't recall. Martha arrives asking if the heroine is awake. She says she couldn't sleep last night because she was worried about the warrior, but is now relieved to see her well. At that, the silver-haired girl apologizes for the trouble. Martha continues, saying they were surprised to see her so injured, and if Merlin hadn't gone to save her, who knows if she'd still be with them. Alice is shocked to discover that it wasn't a grand knight, but rather Merlin who saved her. In her thoughts, it doesn't make sense that Lucifer III, being who he is, saved her. Martha asks if there was some misunderstanding between the two, but before Alice can respond, she adds that maybe she should give him another chance. She goes on saying they're an old couple, that it won't go anywhere if she keeps things at a standstill, and suggests she take this opportunity. Alice shouts that they're not an old couple, and then thinks it's a big misunderstanding since they seem more like sworn enemies. The bar owner continues, saying she understands and that Alice must be shy because she's young. The situation only gets worse for the silver-haired girl. For a heroine, it's humiliating to be saved by a demon king, but unfortunately, it's the truth and she can't accept that she owes him a favor. Alice asks Martha to call Merlin to talk. As the blonde approaches to speak, he hears voices coming from her room thanking her. The heroine says there's no need to thank her. and she's glad the two are safe. The red-haired man tells Alice they must show their gratitude, as if she hadn't taken action, they probably wouldn't be alive, and they'll always remember that. Listening to the conversation, Lucifer thinks that even though she's just a foolish heroine, other people respect her, and he concludes that being a hero isn't so bad. The two leave the room and Merlin enters. He wants to know if she's feeling better. It starts by mentioning that he heard from Martha that Alice called for him and asks her to say what she wants to talk about. The heroine says that given he went out of his way to save her, she reluctantly has to express her gratitude. However, she tells him not to get any ideas. She doesn't hate him at the moment, but that doesn't mean she's forgiven him. The blonde is indignant that things didn't go as he planned and thinks that even if she didn't want to devote her life to him, at the very least, Alice should have been crying. He responds that he won't accept just that. He needs her to repay him because he can't just save people for free. Finally, he suggests that she give him an adventurer's recommendation. She refuses to do so. Insistently, Lucifer tells her it's disappointing how she treats the savior of her life. Alice retorts, saying that if he'd have told her he didn't want to get involved in any debts, even though he saved her, she warns him not to think she'll do anything for him. Blackmailing her, he says it's fine because he'll tell the traveling poets coming the next day that the 233rd heroine is ungrateful and a complete scoundrel. Angrily, she says she won't forgive him if he dares to slander her. Taunting her even further, he says that now she's threatening him and asks how big she thinks she is. He finishes by saying that since she doesn't want to cooperate, he has nothing more to say. Everyone in Britain will know that the former heroine is a scoundrel with no morals. Alice falls for his bluff and insists he doesn't go. With a victorious smile, he thinks that this will do, hoping she'll obediently become his stepping stone into the middle class. That night, at the collapsed Goblin Palace, a mysterious woman appears amidst the fallen stones. The dark-haired woman comments that she made it just in time. If it weren't for today's deadline, she wouldn't have known that the Saubus branch of the goblins was hiding underground in Wales. And she calls out to her deer. The woman finds what she was looking for. With her magic, she lifts a piece of wood and commands it to reveal its true form. Then the object disassembles. Inside is a golden key that seems very valuable. The dark-haired woman laughs as she picks up this key. She has finally obtained the third key to the army of hell. Holding the key, she remarks that she went through a lot of trouble to find it, yet it was easy to take. A dark portal opens, calling her. Calzona bows to her majesty. The mysterious voice asks if she has obtained the key. Her answer is affirmative. Then the voice confirms that the rumor was true. It's no surprise they hadn't migrated south to join the kingdom. Still bowing, Calzona replies that it seems that way and that she hadn't thought they would hide so well. Satisfied, the voice declares that the plan to revive the ancient kingdom has already been set. Once they gain the power of the army of hell, changing Britain will be easy. The woman says she'll offer her very soul to revive the kingdom. Back in the kingdom, Alice and Merlin are setting off in a cart. Lucifer III tells Henry to take care of his mother. The boy responds not to worry, he'll look after her, and when he has an aura, he'll go to Wrexham to find him. Martha tells Merlin to marry Alice soon and live happily ever after. They don't take this well. Merlin wonders if it's a curse because it's so horrifying. The heroine says it's the worst curse she's ever heard in her life. Tension hangs in the air during their journey. Suddenly furious, she asks how he dares to look down on her. Angry, he says that's exactly what he wanted to say and questions where she thinks she is and how she dares to look down on him. The blonde adds that at least he has people who come to see him and suggests she remove the padding to see if anyone would visit her. She retorts asking what's so great about being an idol for middle-aged women. She claims that her padding is to protect against shocks, not to cover her flaws. Merlin bursts out laughing at her ingenious explanation, insisting that she just wants him to die laughing so she doesn't have to repay her debt. Infuriated, she kicks him out of the cart, but he clings to her leg. Screaming, she asks how he dares to say that and calls him so poor that he needs to hitch a ride with her because he can't afford a ticket to Wrexham. The blonde denies this, claiming he's showing respect by using the slow donkey, and asks if she doesn't see that the moment he entered the shabby carriage, she was promoted. Almost exploding with anger, she replies that she doesn't see it at all and tells him to get out, calling him a sex-crazed demon king and saying she never wants to see him again. Martha, very pleased, remarks that they really get along well. The journey to Wrexham was never calm. Alice and Merlin were either bickering or growling at each other, and so a week passed. Upon arriving, both were excited. She wanted to get as far away from him as possible, and he was eager to become an adventurer, so she would feel envious. Wrexham, Adventurers Guild, Merlin enters confidently and excitedly, while Alice arrives irritated with his showboating. They hear a noise and look in the direction of the sound. A man is handling a crystal ball. It's a holy rank knight. Everyone is astonished to see such a strong man up close. Lucifer asks if this knight is like the Goblin Emperor. Alice replies that there are differences between them, as there are only 3 of them in this guild, including the Old Master. The devil laughs, mentioning that he had many holy rank subordinates when he was a demon, and concludes by calling her guild miserable. A man arrives, asking if Alice has brought back an old flame. The man is drunk and says that Arnold will cry in the bathroom. He approaches Merlin, asking how he tamed that wild horse and requesting some pointers. Furious, the silver-haired girl warns Hobbs that they are not in that kind of relationship and that she won't hold back if he keeps talking nonsense. Hobbs says he was just joking, pointing out that a girl won't be popular with guys if she keeps getting into fights, and he gestures toward Lugia as an example of charm. Alice tries to show that she's not jealous of his remark. Lugia calls her over to talk and they greet each other. She asks what Alice gained this time considering she was gone for so long. Alice asks her not to mention it. Then the cat girl asks if she came to pick up a new mission. Sadly, Alice replies that she didn't. In fact, she came to give a recommendation for a certain someone. That someone is Merlin, who wants to become an adventurer. The handsome blonde introduces himself. Lugia can't believe her eyes and freaks out, asking when Alice got a boyfriend. She then says she doesn't approve as there's no way Alice can get married before her, especially since she's more popular. The heroine tells her not to worry because they aren't in that kind of relationship. Confused, her friend asks what happened. Alice explains that he needs her recommendation due to certain circumstances. She goes on to expose Merlin, saying he's on the wanted list of restaurant owners. He's a fugitive. Her colleague says he's come to the right place. Once you've joined the guild, your bounty is revoked and you're allowed to pay off your debts while working. Lucifer is pleased that his bounty will be revoked. The cat girl explains that they need to test his strength first and his rank will depend on his power. The benefits will be greater if his rank is higher, and the higher the rank of the mission, the higher the reward. Merlin sees no point in being an adventurer if he can't take high-rank missions. She tells him not to worry if his rank is low, and that he should just take on more missions. Lugia mentions an elder who's 102 years old and works hard. He became a silver adventurer after completing 999,999,999 low-rank missions. Very rewarding. Merlin finds this ranking method terrible. She adds that of course there's a faster way to rank up, by getting stronger. Once he becomes stronger, his rank will increase. Not understanding the logic, he says that the elder is just wasting his life rather than getting stronger. Finally, the cat girl explains that the adventurer's guild is quite fair. Even an amethyst adventurer could be demoted. If an adventurer doesn't work for a long time or causes a negative influence on society, the rules state they can be demoted to iron rank. Now Lugia asks Lucifer to place his hand on the crystal ball, which will glow in different colors according to his strength. Being the pervert he is, he jokes, asking if the crystal ball could be the girl's chest instead. Merlin approaches the crystal ball. Confidently, the blonde says he'll show the inferior mortals the overwhelming power of the Pride Monarch. Everyone watches eagerly to see if he's really strong. But nothing happens, the color doesn't change. Lugia feels sorry for him and says there was no reaction, so he can't become an adventurer. Everyone bursts into laughter. A man says he probably couldn't even handle a goblin. A girl asks where he got his courage from, and the redhead tells him to come back when he reaches low rank. Alice pulls him aside and asks what he's doing and tells him to use aura or mana. Merlin replies that he doesn't have them and has never used them in any battle. Not understanding, the heroine asks how he managed to defeat so many monsters. He replies that it's likely because his quick draw technique is at such a high level that he doesn't need aura or mana to fight. Shaking, she asks how a sword technique could work without any magical force. Lucifer simply tells her to treat him normally and reminds her that she said he could become an adventurer by recommendation. Desperate, she asks if she can recommend him and assures them that he's qualified for the job. But, unfortunately, Lugia responds that the headquarters abolished the wooden rank adventurers, those who were regular people a few years ago. The rules make that very clear. Irritated, Merlin demands that if everyone wants to rely on a crystal ball, they should send the guild's strongest fighter to duel him, and that would solve the problem. It's the first time Lugia has witnessed something like this and tells him not to joke around. His expression shows he's serious, and he even says that they can all attack him at once. The elder appears and suggests they test his strength. Now the question is whether they should test the protagonist's strength. People are amazed because this is the guild's old master, Taylor, who will do it personally. Lugia explains that he saved a holy rank expert who killed a giant with a single punch when he was only 17. In addition to being a big name in Britain's martial arts, she asks the hero if he accepts the challenge. With a glint in his eye, the old man says he's seen many rookies over the years, and if he doesn't move his old body, others might think the guild has no one capable. Clenching his fist, Iron Fist Lucio comments that this is exactly what he needed, and that you should fight now. However, Taylor explains that this place is too small, and there's a training hall big enough out back. The hero looks back and tells the guild members not to follow, as this is a battle between him and the young man. Alice comments that this is very odd and asks Lugia why the old guild master won't let others watch. Lugia explains that her grandfather is worried about the power difference and that spectators might get hurt or have their self-esteem bruised. There are holy rank challengers every year, but, impressed, Alice realizes there are even holy ranks in this guild. Lugia adds that her father said her grandpa has never lost since reaching the holy rank. The old man has spirit, while the protagonist is a normal person, but he'll still fight with his full power. At that moment, the young man is impressed, asking if he can really go all out now. Determined, he tells the old man not to blink as his quick draw is truly fast. The bald master invites him to show his strength. Obliging, the blonde charges forward. Noticing the young man's agility, the old master is impressed. The sword approaches the man's face, leaving a deep cut in the ground. The cut is so powerful that a massive amount of energy ends up surging through the entire area, reaching all the way to the city. Afterward, a huge cloud of dust rises along with broken bricks. The edge of the boy's sword came very close to the old man's face. He ends up falling to the ground, startled. Mary reassures him, saying that this was the blunt side of the sword, and she explains that if he had used the other side, the old master might have been dead at that very moment. Taylor, deep in thought, realizes he would still have been instantly killed even with his full power. Shaken, he wonders who this young man really is. Later that afternoon at the guild, the heroine and Lucifer bid farewell to the people. The guild members are left puzzled by what just happened. With a sigh, Lugia comments that Alice's old flame is pretty arrogant, but he's just a normal person, so she wonders why he went to all this extra effort. The old man explains that he only got hurt by chance, but that they'll need to pay a good amount for the damages caused to the nearby houses. Hearing this, people are surprised. One questions how a normal person could have upset the guild master, and another comments that the attack was directed at dispersing the crowd. To maintain order, the old man begins tapping his cane on the floor. This scares all the adventurers in the guild. Nervously, the elder calls for silence, saying he has his own reasons, and that's where the matter ends. Meanwhile, outside the city, several people are confused and awestruck by the massive disturbance that just took place. Looking to the side, Urina also notices the source of the commotion. The protagonist, however, is thrilled. He recalls the old man explaining that mana and aura are the only standards used by headquarters, but he made an exception for him. Turning over the badge, he notices there's something written on the back. It has his name, Merlin Lucifer, along with his occupation as a villager and his rank, permanently iron. However, he's disappointed to see he's still lower ranked than that girl. Alice then asks if he really managed to defeat the guild master. In response, Lucifer comments that death is true death for him, and all he did was show a bit of his strength. He explains that her guild master is fairly ordinary and that, if anything, he's only slightly stronger than the 7 generals he once commanded. On her knees, Alice remembers Merlin's feats and wonders how many years it will take for her to defeat him and avenge her humiliation, questioning if it's possible within her lifetime. Meanwhile, the protagonist clutches his badge. Excitedly, he says he's an adventurer starting today and can live a life of killing monsters and earning enough money to buy the nicest house in Britain. Amused, she tells him to stop overthinking it. As a lower-ranked adventurer, he should just sleep and dream all he wants. Annoyed, he says that only her rank is higher and tomorrow he'll take on a mission and earn so much that she wouldn't make that much even in 10 years. As they part ways, they say their goodbyes. Afterward, the young man starts walking toward his home, but he ends up stopping midway. Fiddling in his pocket, he remembers something. He has 2 tickets for horse things, but no money. He wonders where he'll sleep tonight, and it's a question that comes from the depths of his soul. Approaching a lady in the rain, he asks if she wants to buy a box of matches. He also asks an older man if he'd like to buy a waterproof matchbox. Standing in the rain, he's freezing and very hungry. He wonders if he'll end up sleeping on the street and regrets betting on horse things if he'd known this would happen. At that moment, he tosses the match onto the ground, putting it out. He stands up, excited, deciding it doesn't matter and that he'll go eat at Alice's place. Meanwhile, the heroine is at home. She's taking a hot bath, feeling relaxed and happy in her bathtub. Smiling, she thinks about the protagonist and wonders who would ever give a job to someone at iron rank. At that moment, she prays to God that the bastard sleeps on the street like a beggar. She comments that it would be better if he were hungry and cold, with no one buying the matchbox he's selling. Just then, the blonde starts sneezing in the rain. Suddenly, someone begins knocking at her door. She wonders if the landlord is in a hurry and remarks that she just got back. Putting on her slippers, she steps out of the bath and goes to answer the door. Still in her towel, she tells the landlord he doesn't need to come so late. However, she opens her eyes and realizes it's not Martha. With a passionate look, the protagonist asks if she needs a man on such a lonely night and suggests he could lend her his shoulder and create a good memory if he can stay a few more days. Suddenly, a deafening silence fills the room. Alice, being highly hostile in close quarters, decides a sweet trap won't work, so she responds by kicking him in the head. The kick is so strong that it sends the protagonist flying. As she slams the door, she shouts that she doesn't care how he found this place, but he's not to bother her again. Getting up with a bruised nose, the boy is annoyed. Suddenly, an older woman appears, asking why he's intruding on her hunt. Frustrated, the heroine goes back to her bath, but unexpectedly, someone starts banging on her door again. Without thinking twice, she grabs her sword. Fully dressed, she exclaims that she's had enough and calls Merlin a bastard, telling him not to push his luck. But it turns out to be the landlord knocking at the door. Alice is suddenly nervous, realizing who it is, while the protagonist grins in the background. The elderly woman tells Alice that her lease agreement clearly states that weapons are not allowed indoors, and Alice apologizes. The blonde interrupts, calling out to the heroine. With arms crossed, they question how she can make such a scene, asking how she can use her sword in someone else's home and insisting she put it away immediately. Irritated, she asks what he just said and how he dares to argue with her like that. The older woman then tells both of them to take care of their attitude. She wonders how they can live together when they're fighting like this right after getting married. Upon hearing this, the heroine is completely shocked. Stammering, she insists that she has nothing to do with this guy. At that moment, the protagonist calls her. With teary eyes, he asks if she's still mad at him and wonders how she could talk about them not being married anymore. The old lady mutters that she may no longer be able to rent the place if this keeps up and is genuinely worried Alice might destroy her home on a bad day. Nervous, Alice explains that she usually doesn't draw her sword in her home. The older woman then instructs her to put her sword away and let her husband in, adding that she shouldn't embarrass herself in front of the neighbors late at night. She then asks Alice if she'd like to be evicted. The boy then hugs her, apologizing for the inconvenience and saying he's used to his dear's bad temper and will tell her to control herself better in the future. With a chuckle, the old woman remarks that, as the saying goes, one day as husband and wife means a lifetime of devotion, and it wouldn't be good for them to quarrel over trivial things. Annoyed, the heroine stomps on the protagonist's foot. The elderly woman then mentions that Alice needs to pay this month's rent, and the heroine reluctantly agrees to go get her money. The landlord adds that despite her bad temper, Alice is a good girl, and the protagonist should take good care of her because she seemed a bit down when she was looking for a place with just one suitcase. She then wonders aloud if Alice really went through a tough time and asks the boy if he was the cause of it all. The older woman then hands another key to the protagonist in case Alice gets evicted again. As she bids them goodbye, she leaves. Inside the heroine's house, the boy celebrates, saying he now has a guaranteed place to stay. With a mischievous grin, he suggests to her that she should use a little extra padding. A sword then hovers close to his face. With ease, he manages to deflect it, and Alice calls him a bastard, vowing she won't let today pass without payback. Smiling, the boy says he's her husband now and asks if she wants to see herself widowed by pointing that sword at him. Stammering, she demands to know what he means by that, calling him a shameless bastard. She warns him that if he uses his move here, he'll turn the house into a pile of rubble and will have to pay for it. He better think twice before pointing that sword. Irritated, she thinks to herself that sooner or later she'll get her revenge and he won't be able to retaliate. Then she asks if he's planning to stay for free. In response, he simply sits on the sofa. He tells her not to get too excited and to think of a win-win situation, as she won't throw him out after hearing him out. With her arms crossed, Alice tells him to get on with it. Hungry, the boy grabs a banana and suggests they rent the place together. He explains that she probably doesn't have much money and that paying rent is a huge expense, so it'd be easier to split it with someone. Alice considers it, saying it makes sense, but questions why she wants to do that with him since they're enemies. Alice questions how long it's been and wonders if they should have turned the page long ago. Reluctantly, she thinks she won't turn the page with him, but deep down she knows he's right, as it could save her a lot of money each month. Agreeing, she says they can rent the house together, but he'll sleep on the sofa, and on top of that, he has to pay the rent now. In response, the protagonist just tosses a banana peel in her hand. He's secretly worried, thinking he'll pay up and start working on SSS-ranked Enki missions, which will be easy for him, allowing him to get rich quickly. Excitedly, he reminds himself that he still has 2 tickets for a shot at the high life. The next morning in the guild hall, several men are watching the crystal ball for the horse race results. Irritated, the protagonist declares that he bet everything he had on it. Lugia, holding a bouquet of flowers, just observes them. She wonders why her grandfather gave an adventurer certificate to someone like him, questioning if he could be her grandfather's illegitimate son, considering he even covered for the damages on the streets yesterday. A man approaches Alice, calling her beautiful and politely offering her roses. He tells her that no matter how lovely a flower is, it pales in comparison to her beauty. Hesitantly, she declines but thanks him. One of the adventurers mutters about the tree starting up again, while another comments that he's really pestering Alice. Another man chimes in, telling Arnold to stop wasting his efforts. He says that the blonde guy, Merlin, has surpassed him and won Alice's heart. Hearing this, Arnold is completely shocked. Shaking with anger, he asks where he came from and demands to know what's going on between him and Miss Alice. At that moment, he draws his powerful sword. He declares that Merlin must have threatened Miss Alice and announces that he, Arnold, the eldest son of Count Austin, challenges him to a duel. Merlin then questions if this is really necessary and insists he has nothing to do with Alice. The other man retorts that the two are living together and questions how they could have nothing between them. At this, Arnold begins to stutter, his eyes widening in shock. He shouts astonished, asking if they're really living together. Frustrated, Arnold argues, insisting they aren't living together and calling the blonde a bastard who invaded her house last night. Arnold then declares that strength is the only measure of a man's worth and even fears Merlin's skills. Shoving mission reward between 1,000 and 5,000 gold coins. He explains it's a recently received request open to any adventurer. He asks Merlin what he thinks and suggests they use their strength to prove who's more deserving of Miss Alice. In the background, Alice asks if her opinion matters at all. The mission is an A-rank one, detailing that many undead have recently been appearing in a region and their elimination is urgent. Arnold asks Merlin again what he thinks, saying they'll prove their worth to Miss Alice through their strength. The heroine asks Lugia what they're talking about. Lugia explains that it's a mission from Ben Bikar, and that they started recruiting recently. She says that grave robbers infiltrated an underground palace and triggered traps within. Since then, undead have continued to appear and been attacking nearby villages. In this desperate situation, the regular army wasn't enough. Arnold mentions that his partner has hired a holy ranked adventurer for a huge fee and says it would be an honor if Alice joined his team. He explains it's Claude who joined the guild yesterday. With her arms crossed, Alice comments that victory seems assured with a holy ranked person on the team. She accepts his request to form a team, and Arnold heads to Lugia, politely asking her to stamp the mission. The guild stamps the mission. Arnold is elated. He tells Merlin that from now on, the battle between men has begun and that he'll soon have the means to do whatever he wants if he has enough money. However, Merlin ignores him and turns to Lugia, saying he wants to join the mission too. Awkwardly, she mentions that he needs at least 2 people on his team and apologizes, saying it's a fixed rule. At that moment, the former Demon King starts to think. Picking up a seemingly drunk man, he declares that he'll do. Lugia hesitates, but her grandfather appears, telling her to just let them go. He explains that it's fine and that she should allow it. Smiling, the boy then thanks the guild master. Sometime later, Alice and Arnold's team is inside a carriage. Arnold introduces Alice to Claude, the holy ranked adventurer who is now part of their team. But the holy ranked adventurer tells them to forget any ideas of teamwork, cooperation, or sharing. He says they should leave the stronger enemies to him while they stick to killing the weaker ones. Smiling, Arnold asks if Mr. Claude is concerned about their safety and comments that he can be careful and assist him in the mission. The adventurer retorts, asking who gave them the idea that they could help him and warns that if they slow him down, he'll abandon them without mercy. Feeling uneasy, Alice wonders why he's treating his team so harshly. She realizes that her perspective may have changed after seeing Merlin kill others with a single strike. Alice thinks that if she'd known it would be like this, she might have gone alone and wonders if Merlin has already found a team. Meanwhile, the protagonist is wondering where he can find a carriage. With a mischievous smile, he decides he'll borrow something from Alice. He calls out to Hulks, the drunk man he's teamed up with. The next morning after they set off, Hulks seems to be regaining his senses. He questions Merlin about whether he really agreed to go to such a place. Merlin responds by asking if he's seen the guild's stamp on the mission and mentions that Hulks was making a lot of noise about wanting to join. Holding his head, Hulk suggests they should turn back immediately. He says the royal palace will send others to deal with it soon, and they're not going there just to die. Hulk explains that his brother should listen. Although the mission is authorized by the government and comes with a high reward, it's not easy to earn. He mentions the recent outbreak of undead and says that, at best, they're only going there to distract them. Smiling, the former demon tells him there's nothing to fear and that he need only hide behind him. Watching this, the red-haired man wonders if this guy is alright, while the protagonist begins to laugh maniacally. Hulks points out that the pyromancer is of a low rank, and the blonde kid only knows some martial arts, questioning what kind of chemical reaction they can create. Pointing to another direction, he notes that Alice and her team are ahead and wonders if it's a good idea to gain some experience with them to earn 1,000 gold coins. Waking up, the redhead suggests they kill a few monsters and leave, as they have a holy rank novice with them and likely won't be in any danger. At that moment, several horses approach. Looking back, they see a group of people carrying red flags who appear to be knights. Surprised, the redhead wonders if they're people of the Duke of Rosa and explains that he's a noble lord in Wales, though his forces aren't particularly large. He mentions that the person in the carriage is probably a member of the Duke's family. One of the knights then approaches the pair, asking if they know the quickest way to Denbishar. The redhead suggests that if they want to save time, they could take the hill route, which is a bit narrow, but someone with a carriage probably wouldn't make it through there. However, if they'd rather avoid that direction, they could head south, though autumn is when rhinoceroses roam that area, which could cause some trouble if encountered. Irritated, the knight questions how he could suggest that a carriage travel down muddy paths and asks if he's cursing their lady with poor health. Before the knight can escalate, Merlin steps in and defends his teammate, blocking the knight's attack. The knight then commands Merlin to release his whip, asking if he wants to be punished as well. Gripping the whip, the boy just smiles. With his strength, he begins to pull. His force is so great that the knight is dragged off balance and both he and his horse fall to the ground, with the knight hitting his head. Standing over him, Lucifer says the knight should improve his attitude, pointing out that they asked for directions and were shown a faster route, yet they weren't the least bit grateful. Lying in the mud with his face dirty, the knight is infuriated by this. Fearful, Hulks warns Merlin that they shouldn't be doing this, as these people are from the Duke of Rosa. He explains that he's the most powerful person in all of Wales, and that anyone with a heroic spirit is like a local tyrant on his lands. However, Merlin retorts that he doesn't care if he's the Duke of Radishes or the Duke of Cabbages. He'll make sure anyone who offends him gets a taste of their own medicine. Infuriated, the knight stands up, announcing that this is the first humiliation he's faced since becoming the Knight of the Rose, and challenges both of them to a duel. Feeling confident, the protagonist readily accepts, saying they'll have a good fight. In the background, a woman shouts for him to stop. Addressing the knight, Cecilia questions if a Knight of the Rose has really become so cheap, asking how he could challenge a weakling to a duel. On his knees, the man quickly apologizes to Lady Cecilia, explaining that they had insulted him. The woman dismisses it, saying that it doesn't matter and that these commoners have likely never seen nobility before. Why should they blame them? She then asks if they would stop for two ants blocking their way, which leaves the two feeling insulted. She apologizes for her servant's rudeness. Completely oblivious to the situation, the protagonist remarks that it doesn't feel like a real apology since she didn't show her chest. His companion is completely shocked, asking what he's thinking. Deeply annoyed, Kaio makes a move to attack, but the woman stops him. She says it's not worth wasting time getting angry over a low-ranked iron, and time is ticking. They should leave now. With a disdainful look, Merlin seems visibly irritated. However, Lucifer just responds with a mocking smile. At that moment, Cecilia's carriage leaves the scene. Smiling, the protagonist mutters about how irritating they all are and hopes he never encounters them again. Meanwhile, in the other carriage heading toward the destination, Arnold is talking about his large family estate, mentioning how he used to get lost every day when he was younger and that he's never touched money, having no interest in such things. He asks Alice if she knows what he means, while she merely thinks that being poor has limited her imagination. Arnold then explains that Alice has reignited his hope in life. He says that on that day, he was on his way to the city of Elgin to visit his uncle on behalf of his father. However, he saw something different when he looked out the carriage window. 6 months ago, Alice went to Elgin to slay a giant wild boar that was wreaking havoc on the farmlands. He recalls that when he saw Alice, he understood what they meant by "you can't escape your fate." Back then, a stranger approached and made a proposal to the heroine. She was in the middle of her journey and immediately declined. Since then, he's joined the guild and has been, as he puts it, courting her. Bowing, he says that God brought them together to witness the birth of the master swordsman of Elgin and work together, and now he only needs her to do him a small favor, to fall in love with him. However, she responds that she can't help him with that. Interrupting, the holy ranked adventurer asks if he can ask a question. He wants to know who the legendary swordsman of Elgin is. He mentions that he's always heard people talk about how strong the swordsman is and is a bit curious about it. Alice senses that this adventurer is hiding a secret and wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't know her husband. Arnold explains that the Redbeard brothers are famous holy ranked pirates who even royalty couldn't touch. However, the master swordsman of Elgin quickly killed them with a single strike. Hearing this, the adventurer dismisses it as nothing special. This comment shocks both the heroine and Arnold. The knight elaborates that even among holy ranks, there are strong ones, weak ones, and even fakes. To those in the holy ranks, he says, those pirates are nothing. He remarks that there are few true experts and criticizes the incompetence of royalty, which makes people place their hopes in complete unknown. Alice can't help but wonder why he's talking like an old grandfather. Nervous, Arnold wonders if the master swordsman of Elgin can't be called a hero, then who in Britain could be? The adventurer then asks if he's heard of the 4 heroes of the previous kingdom. Upon hearing this, the noble begins to stutter nervously, while Alice wonders what he's talking about in the background. Explaining further, he shares that the thief or dragon tamer Calzone assassinated 7 holy ranks from the Empire in a single night. Claude also introduces the twin sword masters Zoe and Joey, whose secret weapons are considered the strongest in the Empire, along with the King of Giants. Then the last warrior, known as Bernard the Stormbringer, is described as a true war machine on the battlefield. Claude concludes that these 4 heroes could be considered the strongest, while the rest are merely insignificant cowards. Alice explains that these heroes were meritorious statesmen who established the previous kingdom, earning the title of the 4 heroes. In shock, Arnold wonders if they're talking about the kingdom's founders and questions if these aren't people who lived over 400 years ago. As they converse, the carriage comes to a halt. The driver calls out to young Master Arnold, mentioning they've been traveling for a long time and the horses need to rest. Arnold agrees, suggesting they all step out for some fresh air. Alice calls out to Mr. Claude. She admits that the 4 heroes he mentioned sounded legendary, but they're all dead. She adds that comparing people from today to the dead seems pointless. After hearing this, the holy ranked hero remains silent. In the background, Arnold steps out of the carriage, calling for Alice and asking her to wait for him. Meanwhile, Claude remains alone, arms crossed, contemplating her words. Sitting in a field, he reflects on Meryl and wonders if he destroyed the guild because he couldn't accept the mission. Arnold tries to strike up a romantic moment, commenting on the bright stars, but Alice retorts that it's cloudy and questions where the stars are. With a cheesy smile, he asks if she knows the difference between her and the stars, saying the stars are in the sky, while she's in his heart. Disgusted, she gets up, tells him to stop, and decides to look for Claude. Sometime later, Alice finds herself walking alone in the forest. She hears someone nearby talking about offering their soul to revive the previous kingdom. Curious, she hides in the bushes, but her eyes widen when she sees Claude moving to attack her. His sword's blade stops just shy of her head. Claude comments that it's just Miss Alice. He thought she was a thief or something of the sort. Apologizing, he asks if there was something urgent for her to come here so suddenly. With her heart racing, she merely says they should leave as she came to inform him of that. Casually, the adventurer thanks her. Glancing at her, he asks if she heard anything just now. She replies that she didn't and asks if he said something. Claude then says they'll head back and might reach their destination by nightfall if they're lucky. Suspicious, Alice finds his behavior odd and wonders what he meant about her father. Meanwhile, back at Arnold's carriage, they are surprised by the arrival of several horses. Seeing the young man, Cecilia remarks that she didn't expect to see him here. Happily, Arnold responds that he didn't expect to see Miss Cecilia either. He asks if the seminar is in recess and wonders why she came here instead of enjoying her time at home. Cecilia replies that she's here to address the crisis on her father's behalf. Arnold mentions it's quite the coincidence since he's here with the same intent and even has high-ranked allies, including a holy ranked specialist. Cecilia is visibly shocked, surprised to hear that there's a holy ranked member in his party. Suddenly, Arnold's driver calls his attention, pointing to the side and urging them to look. Arnold glances over and sees a large group. It's a herd of flaming rhinos, gregarious magical beasts of mid-rank that migrate south every autumn. This herd of flaming rhinos is charging toward the nobles. Both Arnold and Cecilia are struck with fear and anxiety. Their horses begin to neigh in terror. One of the knights shouts orders, telling everyone to protect the lady. He instructs them to use their lances from afar and their swords up close, but under no circumstances should these magical creatures get near Lady Cecilia. In a panic, Arnold wonders about Miss Alice and Mr. Claude, questioning where they might be. Meanwhile, the herd of flaming rhinos continues their relentless advance. Demonstrating another form of magic, Cecilia activates a full sacred light arbitration. The spell cast by Cecilia indeed benefits all the knights in her troop. Kaya shouts that they must not allow these creatures to harm the lady in any way. Suddenly, someone appears amidst the knights. It's a troop from the rank-stand adventurer who intervenes in the battle. Seeing this, one of the knights warns him to stay back, insisting they should regroup and resist the attack. With his immense power, the adventurer explains that he doesn't need to group up for warmth. Radiating a lethal aura, he charges forward. From a considerable distance, he delivers a single sword strike. Both Cecilia and her knights watch, waiting for the outcome. The strike is so powerful that it creates a tornado, annihilating all the flaming rhinos in its path. Watching from afar, Alice is also awestruck. Following the adventurer, Arnold introduces him, saying, "This is Mr. Claude, my teammate on this journey and a rank-stand expert." Impressed, Cecilia asks how he managed to convince such a companion and inquires about the conditions he set. Arnold replies that it cost him 200,000 gold coins. Cecilia promptly doubles the offer, saying she'll pay twice what the landlord's fool of a son paid, and asks if Claude would join her instead. Without hesitation, Claude simply refuses her offer. Frustrated, Cecilia wonders what's wrong with him, noting that she senses a faint dark magic around him. Declaring that purging the undead is a worthy challenge, she insists on handling it herself to prove her worth to her father. Following her command, Claude kneels, declaring they'll depart immediately. Meanwhile, at the military camp, a bearded man raises a glass, expressing gratitude for the fate that brought them together for this mission. He thanks everyone for accepting the mission and announces they'll hold a feast tonight and deal with those damn skeletons once and for all. Iron is among those celebrating. The holy ranked adventurer tells them to enjoy themselves as he retreats to rest. Curious, Alice asks if he might be a dangerous criminal in the Empire, noting how risky it is to partner with someone like that. She explains that the Adventurers Guild is quite lenient, accepting anyone who passes the test, which has led to many adventurers with dark pasts. Compared to them, Merlin's antics seem mild. Suddenly, Arnold appears beside her, remarking that it's a splendid night and are alone together. Interrupting, Alice firmly states they haven't gathered any intel yet and that they're here to hunt monsters, not for a vacation. Disappointed, Arnold slumps, saying it's a shame. While he thinks it'd be great if Hobbs, the intelligence specialist, were there, he remembers that despite being annoying, Hobbs knows a lot. Spotting Merlin, Alice stumbles backward. Nervous, she asks how they got there when they set off after them. Arnold then questions if this isn't her rival who stole Liz's chastity. Touching Arnold's face, Alice clarifies that nothing like that happened and that they shouldn't say such things. With his notorious reputation among women, Merlin remarks that the village is just a facade hiding his illustrious past and asks if they'd like to join him. Seeing this, Alice calls him the idol of middle-aged women. Approaching the table, she gets everyone's attention. Crossing her arms, she asks everyone to clear the way as they need to discuss something. The girls grumble about the heroine while Merlin asks her if she's just arrived. Alice explains that they encountered some setbacks on the way which delayed them, then asks how he managed to get there. Smiling, he says it's all thanks to Hobbs, a living map, and bets she never expected them to take a shortcut on their donkey. Frustrated, she starts punching him, calling him a bastard. Merlin laughs, mentioning that with some urging from behind, the donkey runs faster than a horse. Suddenly, someone steps up beside them, catching Lucifer's attention. With tissue stuffed up his nose, Arnold announces that Merlin is indeed brave. However, regarding his love for Miss Alice, he declares he'll never lose to Merlin. Merlin wonders aloud what's wrong with Arnold's nose. Grinning, Arnold says it's the mark of love. He confesses it's the mark of love for Miss Alice, forming a heart with his hands. Confused, the blonde questions if he has a problem. Then Alice asks if he only just realized that now, explaining that he is very slow. Correcting himself, the boy then says he meant that only those with problems would like the girl. Hearing this, she becomes deeply irritated and warns him that if he says one more word, she'll knock him down even if she can't beat him. From a distance, Arnold comments that Merlin proved he's still a man by coming here and begins to anticipate his rival in love, but states that this is the end as Lord Claude will dress and break the dead. Hearing all this discussion, several people wonder if it's about rivals over the woman and comment that they should fight, saying it's quite youthful. Nervous, she approaches the noble, commenting that she's going to search for some information now and that he needs a lot of help. She then suggests that he go back and rest. With the young man deeply in love, he asks himself if she's concerned about Fafner being tired and comments that she's kind and caring, loving her even more. Intervening in the conversation, a drunk man says Arnold has a thing for small chests and claims he's a boy with truly unique taste. At that moment, Alice prepares to hit the man. Landing a direct punch on his torso, she asks if he wants to die or live. Changing the subject, she asks Hobbs if he knows anything about Denbighshire. Responding, the man says he does but needs money. Then she thanks him for the help and explains that she collected a lot of information and reached some conclusions from it. Starting to explain, she says that it's a tomb with the prime minister of the former kingdom in the forest to the north, a 3-layered underground labyrinth in total. She says that this prime minister was actually a necromancer and that these skeletons and undead were probably summoned by him. The standing army was fighting against these undead within the forest and was waiting for the capital to send some people, but from what she sees now, it's difficult to handle. Hearing these theories, the boy begins to think about the former kingdom. Meanwhile, inside an illuminated tent, the saint-ranked adventurer seems to be meditating or doing something similar. Suddenly, he begins to grow very restless. With a serious expression, he speaks about the welfare of the revival of the former kingdom. Sometime later, everyone is sleeping in their respective tents. As for the Saint-class knight, he continues wandering. Going to a sort of barn, he opens the door. Curious, he decides to peek inside. Then a knight enters the place. As he runs towards him, the heroine thinks she knew he was suspicious. The third member is also awake, the redhead, who is taking care of basic physiological needs. He then spots the heroine entering the barn. A bit drunk, he wonders if it's not Alice. Trembling, he tells himself that during the night, maybe it's just imagination. The knight continues climbing higher and higher up a sort of mountain. Hidden in the bushes, the heroine just watches. She wonders if Claude is crazy and questions if he can resolve this crisis alone. She realizes that this seems to be the entrance to the labyrinth of the Linder ground. A day passes already in the morning. Inside one of the tents, Arnold observes a scene in complete shock. From what we can see, it appears to be the protagonist snoring next to Alice. Crying in despair, he pulls off the blanket and hopes that Alice will say she was forced to do this. However, on closer inspection, he realizes it's the blonde hugging some kind of large pillow. Confused, the man begins to realize his mistake. At that moment, the former Demon King wakes up and stands. He tells Arnold that if he does that again, he'll send him straight to hell and explains that there's no difference between him and the blanket. Nervous, the noble comments that the lady is missing and states that he can't find her anywhere. Desperate, he says that Lord Claude is also missing and wonders if he's the one who kidnapped Miss Alice and ran away. Scratching his head, the redhead says he saw her yesterday and wonders if she went to the tomb in the forest to collect the reward. Seeing this, Lucifer says how dare she break the rules and do something like that behind his back. He then says he won't let her get away with it. Understanding what's happening, the redhead grows worried and starts to speak. But the blonde interrupts, smiling, saying that he's right and that he'll go to the tomb too. Worried, the man states he shouldn't be reckless and that an iron rank like him will only cause more problems than help and that they should all go together. Fueling his pride, Lucifer says that the money for helping is not his goal. He tries to explain that this time the enemy is the undead, so he cannot use them to extend his life and therefore must pursue a high reward soon. Surprised, Arnold comments that Merlin is getting serious about Miss Alice and that, as his rival in love, his imposed mode should be approved. Meanwhile, in the second layer of the underground labyrinth, the saint-ranked adventurer is wandering through the corridor. Waiting for Alice, he thinks that this labyrinth is so complicated that he wouldn't be able to find his way without following Cloud, but he finds it strange and questions why Cloud is so familiar with this place. He wonders if Cloud has been here before, if he has a map of this underground labyrinth, and if he has some connection to the former kingdom's prime minister. Besides that, there's another problem in this whole equation. Looking to the side, he notices signs of battle, and they're fresh. Apparently, someone passed through here. At that moment, some type of force approaches. It's actually two skeletons that seem to be guarding some kind of gate. Both will, however, face Cloud. Ripping his sword by the hilt, the adventurer prepares for battle. Quickly, he delivers a single vertical slash through the air. This attack seems to be fully charged with mana. Within seconds, the two skeletons are completely defeated. Without ceremony, the saint-ranked adventurer heads toward the gate, which bears a painting of the rising sun. Then he opens it with just one hand. It appears to be a completely empty hall. The heroine is still lurking, merely observing. In front of the adventurer, there is a skeleton seated on the throne, as if he were a kind of king. Then Cloud comments that it's been a long time. Seemingly confused, the skeleton questions who he is and why he is sitting in his place of eternal rest. Responding, the knight addresses Lord Ian, saying it has been 400 years. Showing great irritation, the skeleton questions again who the man is. To demonstrate that he did not come to fight, the knight merely plants his sword into the ground. Then he asks the skeleton if he remembers the Empire's Storm Warrior, commenting that the man has grown old. Surprised, the skeleton says the name Bernald, questioning if the man hasn't died long ago. Explaining, Cloud says that the four heroes were revived by the prince with dark magic and are now functioning as undead. Then the skeleton also asks if the prince hasn't died. The knight explains that the prince was lucky and escaped when the former kingdom was destroyed. Since then, he has used dark magic to drain elf blood in place of his life, allowing them to see the light again. Changing the subject, the skeleton confronts him, asking what he is planning to do. Pointing his finger, he explains that they need an even stronger power to unlock the kingdom and revive the former kingdom. Therefore, the skeleton must hand over the key he is protecting. Then the undead understands that he has come only to retrieve that key. Angry, he says that if the ancient kingdom had signed a contract with Satan, their kingdom would not have been destroyed, and that hell is not trustworthy. Then he questions why Cloud still stubbornly follows the wrong path. Arguing, Claude says that there's no need to sacrifice something for power, and that, as acquaintances, they should not fight. Then he asks for the key again. Exuding a lot of dark mana, the skeleton refuses. Also releasing a great amount of mana, the knight apologizes for being rude. Annoyed, the skeleton reproaches him, invoking Bernald, saying that the greatest honor for a warrior is to die on the battlefield, and that he has forgotten the words he once spoke. Then the knight explains that the most important thing to him at the moment is to revive the kingdom. Drawing his long sword, he prepares to strike in an enormous battle that is about to begin. Both undead, very powerful, go into a direct confrontation, attacking head-on. Seeing this immense amount of power, Alice simply stays quiet, observing. Meanwhile, in the first layer of the underground labyrinth, the protagonist is walking around the place. Nervous, he realizes that something feels strange. Placing his hand on his waist, he states that he is lost. He understands that this is bad, as someone could claim the reward before him, meaning he would have wasted his time. However, he remembers that Hobbes mentioned the labyrinth having several layers. Looking at the ground, he starts to form an idea. He says this is a bit impossible, but that to catch up with Alice, he has no other choice. He then prepares to strike the ground with his rod. With just one punch, he causes an enormous impact. Several skeletons below ground are looking up. The blow is strong enough to completely destroy them. Furthermore, it doesn't just create a small hole, but a crater spanning multiple layers. Laughing, she comments that this is faster. Already on the second layer of the underground labyrinth, Cecilia is using her magic, saying for the holy light to expel the evil. This light blinds the skeletons. At this moment, the knight orders his men to attack. Nervous, the noble wonders why they weren't told in detail about the strength of the monsters in this place and that they're doomed if things go wrong. Additionally, the knights seem visibly tired. Irritated, she tells herself that all she wants is her father's approval, wondering why it's so difficult. Kaio starts to explain what they should do, but His Majesty tells him to be quiet as he already mentioned they can escape. Hesitantly, the knight explains that he will go back along the path they took long ago and that there is still an exit. At that moment, Cecilia commands them to press on. She explains that they can escape while she develops the structure of the labyrinth and that they must trust her. She thinks that although the sacred light can expel those who mark the dark creatures, her mana won't last long. Then she prays for the goddess Maria of Light to protect them. Walking through the labyrinth, she notices a crack. Looking to the side, she sees something strange. From the debris on the ground, a skeleton emerges, pulling her by her clothes. Startled, the noble drops her weapon. One of the commanding knights comments that the holy light has disappeared and that the monsters are approaching, questioning what they should do. Fallen to the ground, the woman tells the skeleton not to come closer and begs someone to save her. With a terrifying gaze, the skeleton prepares to finish her off. Then suddenly, a spear is thrown in its direction, striking it directly. Her knight ends up saving her, and without raising his hand, he asks if she is all right. Without making eye contact, she replies that she is and asks where her team is. Then she points out her staff that has fallen to the ground. However, her knight advises her to be careful. Looking up, she sees the presence of a gigantic monster, resembling a skeleton with 3 heads and multiple arms wielding swords. Horrified, she merely says that she feels disgusted. Without ceremony and without a word, a monster charges at her. However, her knight manages to protect her using only a long spear. Quickly, he falls to his knees. With a trembling voice, he asks the lady to run and leave everything to him. Looking to the side, she notices another of her guards being attacked. A large horde of skeletons and warriors is approaching. Fallen to the ground, Cecilia wonders why everything happened this way. Many of her men are lying on the ground, completely defeated. Completely shocked by the situation, she begins to remember her past. She recalls her father saying that survival is for the strong and that the weak and useless have no reason to exist. And he explains that she is the weakest of all the children. Seeing this, little Cecilia feels unsettled. Now outside the gardens, she is being pushed by another child. Laughing, one of the girls comments that she lost again and that she's so useless, being easily surpassed. Then she questions if she really deserves to be the eldest. Leaving, she says she doesn't want to acknowledge it. Little Cecilia begins to cry. Someone then appears, asking the lady how she traveled, and without his hands, asks if she is all right. Being a skilled knight, he helps the girl to stand. Sometime later in the training field for new recruits, Kaio ends up being hit in the face. He is being punished by a man who says he had already warned that anyone who didn't complete the exercises today would get hit. Crying a lot, Cecilia approaches, calls out to the instructor, and gently asks him to stop and to spare the boy. Then a few years pass. Kneeling, the young man calls out to Cecilia, gently asking her to allow him to be her knight and promising to give his life to follow her. Seeing this, the girl was a little impressed, but she quickly starts to smile, embarrassed. Holding the sword, she accepts, saying she will allow him to be her knight. She understands that they are both very weak and that they are just two pathetic creatures, drawn to each other to seek warmth and live. A bit later in the winter, bundled up, Kaio continues training with his wooden sword. Curious, Cecilia asks if he has already reached a high rank and wonders if he's tired of training so much every day. Replying, the boy explains that not at all, as it's the only way he can protect her. This answer leaves the girl surprised. However, she feels very happy, showing a sincere smile. Cecilia then thinks that she is a necessary being in the family, and that her father decided to reuse the waste by marrying someone from a distant place, questioning how Kaio will protect her. Returning to the present, the man continues fighting against the skeleton. The battle seems to be very intense for both of them. Nervous, the knight asks Cecilia why she isn't running, insisting that he will hold him off. Irritated, she says that's nonsense and that they should run together, as that way they have a chance to survive. She explains that this knight wishes for a humiliation if she's in danger, then gently asks her to flee and survive. Cecilia calls him an idiot for still thinking of chivalry in such a situation. Without waiting for the conversation, the skeletons rush toward them both. However, Kaio's attack completely destroys them. He claims it's an honor to fight to the end for someone he loves. The three-headed skeleton then begins to grow deeply irritated. Preparing for battle, Kaio states that this is a decisive showdown and that he will remain loyal to the end. Charging forward, he begins to deflect multiple attacks with his spear directed at the giant zombie. He then manages to strike the central head, destroying it completely. Seeing this result, the young man smiles. The two remaining heads pause. Quickly, they seem to move closer together, showing a frightening smile. The knight in turn then throws his spear to the ground. Out of nowhere, he starts coughing up a lot of blood. Seeing this scene, Cecilia is terrified. Watching the knight being utterly defeated by the swords of the giant skeleton, she cries out his name. Blood is pouring out of Kaio. The skeletal figure lifts his body in a rage and tosses him to the side. The knight then falls backward onto the ground. Desperate, Cecilia runs toward her hero. Holding him in her arms, she tells Kaio to wake up, that he must stand up and protect her. Crying, she reminds him that he swore this to her. At this moment, someone approaches the noble. It's the giant three-headed skeleton. He prepares to finish the girl as well. Afraid, Cecilia realizes that from what she can see, this is where it all ends. Closing her eyes as she cries, she says that it's okay, that her life is empty, bitter, and petty, and that it can finally come to an end. At that moment, a noise begins to emerge from above. Suddenly, a large amount of energy crashes down, destroying everything around, including all the enemy skeletons. Startled, Cecilia closes her eyes while holding Kaio's head. Upon opening her eyes, she sees the dust settling and begins to look around. Mel then comments that it's been a long time since he used a real punch. Rubbing his neck, he wonders if he's actually feeling back pain. Perplexed, the woman wonders if the iron-ranked adventurer from yesterday is really there and questions why he's here. Looking back, the protagonist notices the noble's presence. He then comments that this is quite a coincidence. Smiling, he asks if the arrogant one is the eldest daughter of the Rose family and why she looks so devastated. He explains that they had been here for a long time and that when they were deep in the second layer, they were attacked by strong undead. Looking to the side, Lucifer questions why she entered there when she's a priestess unable to handle so many undead. Hesitantly, the woman explains that she wanted to prove her strength to her father. In response, the hero merely laughs and she asks why he's laughing. Placing his hand over his face, he comments that he finds it ridiculous and questions why she feels the need to prove this to others. He declares that she has proven herself to be a fool. Spreading his arms, he explains that all her men died for a stupid reason, and that if she were of the demon race, a leader like her would be considered incompetent, as the enemy wouldn't even need to act. Kneeling, Cecilia begins to cry, agreeing with Lucifer's words. She says it's her fault that everyone died, and this was even the fate of Kaio, who worked so hard. After hearing these lamentations, the protagonist merely observes her. He then explains that working hard is just a basic requirement, but it's also useless. He goes on to say that he has no interest in giving his life to a noble like her because he has more important things to do. Suddenly, a loud crash can be heard. The three-headed monster, now down to only one head, approaches. He tries to attack the blonde swiftly with his swords. Concerned, Cecilia calls out to him, telling him to be careful. Scratching his head while smiling, Merlin wonders if there's armor to mock them and asks himself why there are always people who provoke him. Suddenly, he grabs his sword without unsheathing it. In seconds, he completely obliterates the monster, making it explode. Confidently, he smiles and questions how that trash, which had already died once, could attempt to fight him, saying it's simply ridiculous. Then he says that the undead are truly annoying because no matter how many he kills, they will never extend his life. Surprised, Cecilia questions what's going on and wonders why so much power in a casual move would really belong to an iron-ranked adventurer. Looking at her knight, she realizes that if she doesn't ask for help, both hero Kaio and she will die here. Walking over to the hero, she gently asks him to rescue them. Being a bit mocking, he asks the girl why he should help them. Stammering, she replies that she can offer a reward. Thoughtfully, the boy understands that the noble must be wealthy and wonders if he shouldn't ask for a hefty sum as payment. He thinks of 500 gold coins and considers it fair. Reacting to her offer, he says there should be a reward and asks if she understands what he means. Hearing this, the noble looks confused. Thinking it over, she realizes that someone as strong as him willing to remain just an iron-ranked adventurer means he doesn't care about fame and money. Embarrassed, she starts to think about what he truly wants. In her mind, an image of her knight Kaio appears. Opening her eyes, she shows extreme determination. She tells herself that Kaio is willing to sacrifice his life, so she has no reason to hesitate. Stammering, she says she understands the reward. Undressing, she declares that she will please him. Irritated, the blonde comments that he doesn't need a reward like that and only wants 5,000 gold coins, but the noble says she has nothing on her but her body at the moment. Drawing his sword, deeply irritated, he says she's incredibly annoying, and that even that washboard over there would be better. Frightened, the noble questions what he's planning to do. Then a strong gust of wind moves toward the noble. The ground where she and Kaio are is entirely separated from the rest. Smiling, Merlin states that the undead can't climb that high and that this should protect them for a while. Cecilia then explains that's not what she wanted and that, in fact, she wanted him to get them out of there. Arguing, Lucifer says he's already being very generous and that the moment is quite busy. Then he tosses something towards the blonde, asking if it belongs to her. It's her magic staff, which she uses with her mage powers. With a strange smile, the protagonist comments that her knight is still alive and asks if she knows what to do as a priestess. Determined, she thinks that she doesn't need anything, but she can't lose Kaio. Looking down, Cecilia notices several skeletons watching her. Worried, she asks the hero if he can get them out of there, as there are too many undead around. But the boy explains that there's no need to worry, as he'll return and keep his promises. While walking through the labyrinth, he understands that there's only one layer left and hopes that Alice is being beaten so hard that she can't retaliate. Soon those gold coins will be his. Meanwhile, some kind of rumbling is happening in the labyrinth. Hiding, Alice observes and thinks it's no wonder that Claude speaks as if he were seeing the previous sky, as he directly says that the heroes of the former kingdom are true specialists. In this case, Claude is fighting this undead skeleton. The heroine then questions what she should do and thinks that he was just some other important criminal, but never imagined it would be this complicated. She realizes that she needs to report to the guild master when she returns and that it's still time to withdraw. In the battle, the skeleton calls out to Bernard, asking what's wrong with him, if he has aged, stating that his movements have slowed and that it's disappointing. However, the saint-ranked adventurer continues his battle, holding his sword. He then declares to Yank that, for a long time, he's been able to maintain his arrogance. Spinning his long sword, he prepares to strike. Charging forward, he begins to deliver several apparently powerful attacks, but the skeleton says he's a fool. Summoning a type of ally, the giant skeleton says he will show his secret weapon, and then calls for the Skeleton King. Hearing this, the adventurer is startled. The ancient skeleton declares that he can't dodge this. The giant hand moves toward the knight and crashes into him. It slams into the ground, breaking everything in its path. Then a huge skeletal head emerges. As it rises from the earth, it's clear that it's at least 4 times larger than its creator. Angry, it asks if he still dares to underestimate him while being carried by his creation. Now weakened, the man still has to hear that his strength remains as it was 400 years ago, meaning he has no chance of winning. He plants his sword into the ground and points at his opponent, saying he only needs 1 strike. Then he challenges him again, stating that he will crush Iron's skull and extinguish his soul flame with his secret art. The opponent couldn't care less, telling him to stop the blah blah and saying that if he's truly strong, he should get past his Skeleton King. Now his aura is visible, and he tells Iron he won't be able to touch him. The knight unleashes his secret art power in storm mode. Alice can't believe this could be human power. It seems more like the fury of a saint-ranked magical beast. With all his strength, he gains momentum and leaps directly at the giant skeleton. Suddenly, there's an explosion in the ceiling that disrupts the fight. A man falls through the ceiling. He wonders what's going on. Meanwhile, Ian asks who this man is. Of course, it's the magnificent Merlin, arriving in grand style and just in time to join the fight. He asks the saint rank if Alice didn't come with him. Confused, the knight wonders how this iron rank didn't stay above. Nervous, Alice wonders why Merlin is there and thinks about how reckless he is to cross the entire labyrinth like that. The problem now is that the knight will have to kill all witnesses to keep the kingdom's revitalization a secret. The skeleton asks Lucifer who he is and how someone as irrelevant as him dares to enter the place of eternal rest. Then he commands them to reduce the blonde to dust. But no one expected him to have a powerful shield. They're shocked as soon as they see this power. And so they both understand that magic cannot approach him, and he should not be underestimated. The girl recalls times when the church suffered greatly because of this. Confused, he asks the skeleton why it attacked him when he hadn't even done anything yet. Still puzzled, he asks who this guy is and what he's done. The answer is simple. He doesn't need to know because he's just a skeleton worth 5,000 gold coins. Furious, Ian questions how he dares to insult him like that. He charges into the fight. Our protagonist just gives a little smirk, utterly unafraid, and takes a punch from the Skeleton King. The knight accepts that the young man is dead, thinking that if even he can't withstand a punch from the Skeleton King, much less anyone else. But that's not what happens. Looking at the scene, he sees Merlin holding the Skeleton King's fist. Amazed by her companion's strength, she wonders if even his physical defense is that strong. The two dark associates can't comprehend what's happening. Ian says it's impossible, that no one can withstand the skeleton hammer. Mockingly, Merlin says the thing the skeleton summoned is pretty interesting. But with one hand, he breaks the Skeleton King's arm. Ian is paralyzed by what he just witnessed. Finally, Lucifer says that a useless undead should go to hell already as he draws his sword from its sheath. He uses his full strength and splits the skeleton in two with his gift. The undead calls him a monster. With everything finished, Alice thought the skeleton would be difficult for Merlin, but she didn't expect it to be killed with a single strike again. In grand style, he sheathes his sword once more. Seeing all this, the knight concludes that probably none of the four heroes is comparable to this intimidating figure, and that it would be beneficial if he worked in service of the Majesty. Satisfied with the 5,000 gold coins earned, the protagonist still wants to see if he can find anything valuable on this old skeleton. As he's wandering, Merlin finds the key on the ground before the knight could grab it. He picks it up, finding it very interesting. The knight thinks about how crucial this key is for the kingdom's revitalization, and that it must not fall into other hands. He then calls Merlin and asks for the key. The brazen blonde questions why he should hand over the trophy to the knight, and an unexpected response comes. The knight offers 200,000 gold coins to buy the key. Not believing the key is worth 200,000, he's already imagining spending it all on horse bets. Just as he's about to accept the offer, he's interrupted by Alice, who says he can't hand over the key, and explains that the knight isn't a living person. Instead, he's one of the four heroes who died long ago. The protagonist asks if he's an undead, and she confirms, saying they were guardians of the former kingdom, revived by magic, and plan to restore the old kingdom. Cecilia continues, explaining that Claude came here specifically for this key, that there must be a big secret hidden within it, and she urges Merlin not to hand it over. Merlin murmurs about the big secret, betting that it's a very valuable treasure that will pay off all his debts. In his thoughts, Claude concludes that to ensure the plan's success, both of them must die. Quickly, he draws his weapon and lunges at Alice to kill her. Luckily, Merlin steps in and shields her, preventing a possible disaster. The knight is impressed by how fast he can be. Merlin apologizes, saying that the two of them split rent, and if he lets her go, he'll have to pay the full amount. Claude then makes a counteroffer, saying that if they hand over the key, they'll act as if nothing happened and go their separate ways. Confidently, the blonde responds that this key may unlock a big secret, and that he'd be a fool to give it to the knight. Moreover, since Claude attacked them, he won't hold back. The undead replies that there's no need to say more. Alice drives her sword through his midsection, and he begins to fall backward. She adds that the holy sword is effective, confirming he truly is undead. Lucifer scolds her, asking why she did that and saying she wasn't supposed to attack like that. Alice responds that he's an enemy and that he'd be doomed if the two attacked together. Annoyed, he says that he's fine if someone fights him alone or teams up against him, but he can't accept joining forces with anyone. Regardless, she must not interfere. Confused, she really doesn't understand him, as he truly seems to be playing fair. The two face each other, and the devil says that 2 versus 1 isn't fair, but he can't make exceptions. In a 1 versus 1, he will sincerely admit his defeat. The knight finds this talk nonsense and thinks it's not as if he doesn't have a chance to win, he just needs to finish them off one by one, risking his life. Claude removes his helmet, revealing his face. His opponents are disgusted. With half of his face disfigured, he says that if anyone asks who is the strongest of the 4 heroes, it would be him, without question. The protagonist responds with a question, asking if it's meaningful to surrender to past glories. Annoyed, his opponent says that he can't defeat a true saint rank just because Merlin knows a few sword moves. Provoking him further, Lucifer laments that Claude won't get the chance to voice his regrets afterward. Not everyone is as lucky as Alice. Alice disagrees, saying that in fact she's very unlucky to be with Merlin. The battle begins with the zombie knight activating his storm mode. The pressure is stronger than before, and it seems that Claude recognized Merlin's strength as he decided to take the fight seriously. The devil only laughs confidently. Claude declares death his enemy in the name of the four heroes. He leaps toward Merlin, saying he will take his head with him. But just by looking at the knight, he freezes. Merlin asks if he isn't going to take his head and questions if he's scared. Claude's senses sharpen during storm mode, and he realizes just how dangerous Merlin is beyond the saint rank. The undead admits his fear, which makes him happy, as it means he has an opponent against whom he can use his full power. The knight tells Merlin he'll understand his feelings now. Then Merlin responds unexpectedly. He says he understands the loneliness of being unbeatable, and that he must be delighted to find a worthy adversary. But, unfortunately, Claude is definitely not the kind of enemy that brings him joy. Excited, the knight dares him to try and admit that he's the worthy opponent. Ashamed of his opponent, Lucifer says that being considered worthy is a truly sad insult. Preparing for the fight, the undead says he will fight with all his strength to leave no regrets and asks to finally stop talking and start the battle. Frustrated, the knight declares that he will fight with all his power to avoid regrets. A massive red aura begins to surround him. Seeing all this power, Alice states that this technique is forbidden, a madman's sacrifice, as it involves trading one's life for 100 times the usual power. Her teacher had told her that this forbidden technique had disappeared entirely from history, so she never imagined she would see it today. With arms crossed, Merlin comments that it looks interesting. A whole red aura begins to take over the environment. Seeing this, Alice starts to feel so nervous that sweat runs down her face. Unbothered, the hero calmly watches his opponent. Suddenly, the undead vanishes in the blink of an eye. In that instant, the blonde looks to the side. Quickly, he defends himself from a surprise attack by the undead using his sword. At the same time, the saint-ranked adventurer begins another move. The blonde decides to do the same, attempting to land a kick on the undead, who manages to dodge. Counterattacking, Claude strikes with his sword, breaking part of the ground. However, he notices that the protagonist managed to evade. Swiftly, he makes another powerful attack that crushes even more of the concrete. Merlin then dodges again, distancing himself from his opponent. Focused, he grips his sword. As he goes to unsheath it, Claude closes in, stopping him. Close to the hero, he prepares for a precise attack. Using his longsword, he delivers a direct horizontal strike. The protagonist shows no reaction. Meanwhile, Alice tries to shield herself from the wind generated by the impact of the blow. Closing her eyes from the dust, she wonders what just happened. Curious, she starts to open her eyes. All she can see is a thick cloud of smoke. In shock, Claude says it's impossible, claiming he killed the blonde. But Merlin explains that it was merely an afterimage. He says that Claude is fast, but not as fast as his sword. Upon hearing this, the undead widens his eyes, remembering when a demon once told him the same thing. Laughing, he admits he's old and that even though he's experienced this sword before, he didn't recognize it. Falling to the ground, he says it was expected from the strongest demon, also known as the ruler of pride, Lucifer. After hearing this, the protagonist looks a bit annoyed. He says he's a famous hikikomori in the demon ranks, rarely traveling, so there's no reason for this as anyone would recognize him. Explaining, hikikomori are people who voluntarily isolate themselves for long periods to avoid all contact with others. Smiling, the blonde says he probably misunderstood. Then he calls for Alice, who is completely stunned by what she just witnessed. Approaching her, the hero claps his hands to wake her. With a charming look, he asks if he swept her off her feet and says it's not too late to worship him. But, averting her gaze, the heroine says she's just, though she barely meets the standards. Changing the subject, she explains that the key might hold some secrets, so he can't keep it for himself, but should instead hand it over to the country. In response, Lucifer gives her a light flick on the face. He questions if there were a treasure linked to the key, she handed over foolishly. Curious, Alice asks what he plans to do by keeping it. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he says they'll split the treasure between the two of them and mentions hearing Claude talk about gaining power. He argues, asking her to think about it, wondering how a saint rank would pursue something without value. Making a strange expression, he tells her not to be so rigid, as he has several debts in the 10,000 range and his largest one is 1 million, so they'll be able to pay them off. Laughing in the background, he celebrates while Alice wonders if she's been tricked by Merlin. At this moment, Lucifer holds the mysterious key in his hand. He says the only problem now is uncovering the secret of this key. With arms crossed, the heroine says she has a well-known friend who's also an adventurer and they could ask her directly. However, a loud noise echoes in the labyrinth. Curious, the boy asks if they're undead, and drawing her sword, Alice asks how that would be possible, since the necromancer was defeated. Opening the door, a large number of undead skeletons enter the area. Adjusting his gloves, Merlin comments that the remaining troops are drawn to the mana of the key and tells Alice not to drag him into it, as he won't take care of her. Retorting, the heroine asks who needs the Demon King's care and tells him to stop being so full of himself. Each of them radiates a different, even opposing, aura. They both prepare for battle against the army of skeletons. Moments earlier, nearby, a bearded man calls out to the troops, asking if they're ready to face the undead in hell again. Responding to his speech, everyone starts shouting enthusiastically. In the trees, several skeletons appear, holding their swords. Among these men is Arnold, holding a simple sword and wearing a helmet that doesn't fully cover his hair. The redhead then calls out to the noble, asking why he's fighting, and the young man replies that his family has a distinguished military history, so he cannot retreat. Disappointed, the big guy realizes the kid was forced into this and questions why his family produced a loser. Changing the subject, the man asks how Alice and the rookie are doing, and the noble says that Claude and Alice should be fine since they're strong, but the man should worry about Merlin. Nervous, the redhead explains that Merlin is actually very experienced, so he warns in advance that he'll run if things don't look good. At this point, the young man places his hand on his shoulder. Excited, he says that he always had fun at Helena's secret cabin, and from what he's heard, the man has many outstanding debts, so he asserts that being rich is his greatest strength. Hearing this, the redhead says he should have mentioned that sooner and declares that he's the most loyal person to Arnold, claiming he'd sacrifice himself for his brothers. One of the soldiers starts playing a trumpet. Quickly, the warriors head into battle against the skeletons. In contrast, the redhead starts to run away, and Arnold calls out, asking him to wait and pointing out that this is different from what the man had just said. Various warriors are fighting against the undead. At that moment, the giant three-headed skeleton appears with its swords. Terrified, the two brothers say they're going to die. Just then, the monster moves to attack them. However, it senses something strange and stops. It begins to disintegrate entirely, as if turning into sand. Within seconds, the monster disappears. Confused, the warriors say the undead suddenly turn to dust, and a female warrior asks what's going on. Standing up, the redhead declares that it looks like they won. Smiling, he claims that's what he expected from himself, while Arnold remarks that as the eldest son of the Austin family, it's a bit much to have to lead a crusade against these undead. His brother agrees with the statement. Back to the present, outside the labyrinth, holding a giant sack, the bearded man announces that it contains the 5,000 gold coins and thanks the heroine for resolving this crisis for the capital. Nervously, she comments that she already told him. Pointing to Merlin, she says he should thank him, as he was the one who killed two saint-ranked foes with just one move. Hesitantly, the bearded man asks if it was an iron-ranked adventurer, one without mana or aura, who did that, and he quickly adds that no one will believe it. Laughing, he says it's rare to see an adventurer who's indifferent to worldly rewards giving credit to others, and frustrated, Alice thinks that no one believes her. At that moment, the man hands a letter to a soldier, explaining that the investigation is complete, and that he should send the report immediately to Her Majesty the Queen. In it, it's written that two saint-ranked adventurers of the former kingdom fought to the death, and when both were weakened, gold-ranked Alice delivered the final blow, with Merlin as a witness to it all. Later that night, in the noble's carriage, surprised, Arnold comments that he didn't think Claude was that kind of person, and that the guildmaster will be shocked to hear this. He continues, saying the powers in the former kingdom haven't faded and that the queen will send the Redbud Knights to investigate. Hearing the name, the protagonist asks about them. Explaining, the noble says they are the king's personal guardians, and from what he's heard, they're made up of 12 specialists, each one equivalent to an entire army. Arnold says he never thought someone like Claude would be around him, and his brother explains that it's normal, as adventurers don't ask about each other's pasts. Hearing this, the blonde says he was the great demon king of the first demon palace and asks the noble if he's scared. Laughing, the redhead asks Lucifer how much he's had to drink, as he's bragging again. Then he says demons are somewhat frightening and often defeat the church's expedition army. He states they wouldn't be able to stop them if they decided to attack here. Curious, the protagonist questions the redhead about where he heard that demons would invade human territories, and he responds that it was from the church. The blonde explains that demons don't invade others without provocation, and that it's always the church organizing an expedition against the demons, never the other way around. At that moment, the man realizes he has a point. Smiling, he tells Alice that's why church extremists only know how to preach, and she says she knows nothing about it. Starting to understand, the redhead then asks why the demons didn't migrate south and align with the kingdom like other races, since it's not a place for non-humans. In response, Melly explains that the evolution of this world can be divided into 4 eras. As the age of humans approached, the elf king led the races southward to form a new kingdom, but the demons rejected this idea. Hearing this new story, the redhead is shocked, asking why. The answer is that demons are an independent race. They don't cooperate with any external influence or serve others. Most importantly, there are unspoken secrets about the 7 palaces and the demons that prevent them from leaving. Impressed, the redheaded says the boy knows a lot about demons, and suddenly, Arnold grabs everyone's attention. He bangs his empty mug on the table to get their attention. Shaking, he tells Melly that it's clear they both won't win the fight for Miss Alice. Smiling, he states that he won't give up and that they'll continue next time, making this one of the best out of 3. Seeing this, Alice becomes completely annoyed. This was the noble's seal of her own carriage, and she wonders if he's mocking her again and if he wants to die. Looking casual, the blonde asks if he forgot something and comments that this is rather important. Meanwhile, back in the labyrinth, Cecilia is crying, wondering where the protagonist is and questioning if he didn't come to save them, despite saying he wouldn't abandon them. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.